Good morning. It's Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. The meeting of the Region of Queens Municipality's regular council meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we do not video, only audio.
Really?
Yes, it's within our policy. One can ask, and I was just going to tell everyone that QCCR Radio is doing audio recording. But according to our policy, it's audio recording only. Changes or approval to the agenda. Are there any changes or approval to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll ask for approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Charlton, seconded by Councillor Amaro. All those in favor? Passed. We have two presentations today. The first one is Property Value Services Corporation, commonly known as PVSC. We have Paul Beasley and Ron Tremblay here with us. We may recall last year we had a similar presentation, so they may go quickly through the background, dwell more on the numbers, and then allow some time for discussion. So, Mr. Beasley and Mr. Tremblay.
Thank you, Your Worship, Council, and staff. Pleasure to be here again this year. And I know you know the basics, and so I'm going to go as Her Worship said through it very quickly. So I know time is of the essence this morning. So go ahead there, Rod, with the first slide there. Next one. Okay, so as we stated last year, we operate under the legislation of the Nova Scotia Assessment Act, and we're independent. We're municipally funded by all 49 municipalities, and we have approximately 130 employees across the province doing the work for yourselves. So what we do and what we don't do, I think this is probably one where there's a little bit of, it's always good to clarify. We essentially deliver the assessment role to 49 municipalities. We provide the market value assessment for taxation purposes to the municipalities. That's really everything we do. We provide those market assessed values. We also administer the CAP program and the Nova Scotia Seasonal Tourist Business Designation program as well. But essentially, we set the assessed values. Now, and that's under the Assessment Act. Under the Municipal Government Act, which is within your world and under your purview, it's the municipalities that have the authority to set the tax rates, collect the taxes, create tax policy, and provide tax relief. We get a lot of questions about that type of thing, like why don't you do, some people can't afford this type of thing. It's not within our purview. It's more in the municipal and provincial side of things. We just set the assessment values. Okay, Rod? So we assess at market value. We went through this last year. I guess the most important thing is to remember that we're 1 year back. The assessed values are based on market data collected up to January 1st, 2023. So 1 year before the roll goes out, essentially. So we're using sales to determine the market values and the movement in the market right up to January 1st, 2023, using sales that occurred in 2022 and even some sales in 2021 if we feel we need to go back a little farther to find some sales. But and that's still on the tail end of COVID, if you'll recall. It's sort of the second half of COVID. So it's still impacting the roll this year. The other thing is we collect data on the properties right up to December the 1st. Just before the roll goes out. So we're out there collecting permit data, sales data, all that type of data to make sure the attributes and physical characteristics of the property are as up to date as they can for the current assessment rolls. All right, Rod. So we use mass appraisal. It's the process of valuing a group of properties as of a given date, which is 1 year prior to, using common data, standardized methods, and statistical testing. The grouping of data is different than your single property appraisals that you would receive if you're going for financing at the bank and so on and so forth. We use mass appraisal, which is a grouping of properties in neighborhoods and municipalities. All right, Rod. So 3 approaches to determining value: sales comparison, income, and cost. I won't go into that. I think you've had a chance to take a look at that. Yep. And the key dates, I've kind of gone through it already. January 1st, 2023 for market value, characteristics rate up to December the 1st before the roll goes out. And the roll was sent out January 8th, and the appeal period just finished a few days ago. And so the 31 days is up now. So people that wanted to appeal, that's done for this year. They have a chance every year to appeal. And appeals are down a little bit this year across the province. So just for your information. Go ahead, Rod. Yeah. So as you recall from the CAP program, I think the most important part of this slide is that this year CPI was 3.2%. So the amount that properties that were eligible for the CAP would increase. The maximum they could increase is 3.2% this year. If you'll recall, last year they were 7.7% because CPI last year was 7.7%. So we saw that CPI come down this year. So if people were capped and nothing else changed on the house, then the value would go up by 3.2% based on that cap legislation. Now the market value could go up considerably more, but the important part is that for taxation purposes, the property owner gets the lower of the two. If the market is lower, they're taxed on the market value. If the cap amount is lower, they get taxed on the cap amount. And I'm going to pass it over to Rod. He's going to walk through some numbers with you.
So good morning, Your Worship, Mayor Norman and councillors. As Paul mentioned, thanks very much for having us today. Give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do. I'm Rod Tremblay, Assistant Director of Operations with PBSC. I think many of you saw me here last year as well. Thank you for having me again. So just talk a little bit briefly about some assessment roll activity, and then I'll get into the detailed numbers for the region of Queens specifically. So last year, inspection work, we had a look at 231 building permits within the region of Queens. So some of these permits would be used to determine changes in assessed value due to physical changes that take place on the property, such as new construction or a demolition, a change in use, or a significant renovation to a property. We looked at 884 property transactions to determine if those property transactions represented market value or not. If it's determined that they do, those property transactions could be used, as Paul mentioned, to determine the movement in assessments year over year, reflective of that market at the base date 1 year prior. We had 389 assessment appeals in the region of Queens in 2023. And I can tell you now that the appeal period is closed, very consistent numbers for this year, very, very similar to last year. Relatively similar increase year over year as well, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So getting into the numbers, there's a year over year here representing, so you can see 2023 is on the right side of the page, 2024 is on the left side there, broken down by tax class for the region of Queens specifically. So 1.58 billion in 2023 increased to 1.97 billion in 2024. That represents a just over 25%, 25.1% increase year over year to total residential assessment. That's up a little bit from the year prior. So in 2023, the lift was 20.8%. So a little bit of an increase there. Once we factor the capped assessments into it, so this is a really important sort of difference in value here for council specifically around the increase year over year. So as Paul mentioned, all of the capped assessments, which for this year, 86% of residential dwellings in the region of Queens are capped, all of those capped assessments increased by 3.2%. So what that does is it tempers the taxable assessment available to the municipality, if you will. So when we factor that number in, there's a movement 1.33 billion to 1.48 billion for 2024. That represents a 12.1% lift year over year. So you can see that that number is significantly down from the 25.1 that the assessments are getting on market value. So that's a sort of a significant difference there. Again, that's that difference in CPI. So Often when we see a lower CPI and a higher market increase, what we see is more properties are capped because it's of a benefit to more properties, and there's more of an impact to that difference between taxable residential, factoring the cap, and total residential, just pure market value. And as I mentioned, 86% of properties are capped in the region of Queens for this year. That's up a little bit from 82% last year. And part of that would be not only another strong year with a strong market increase, that 25%, but also our CPI significantly lower in 2024 at 3.2% versus the 7.7% from last year. So that distance between the two is a little bit greater. We expect a few more properties to come onto the cap as a result. Looking at commercial assessment, so commercial assessment, a much smaller portion of the roll in the region of Queens, as is consistent with the rest of the province as well. So 207 million in 2023 increased to 226 million in 2024, and that's a 9.4% increase overall. Looking at commercial taxable, where there is a significant number of properties that are commercially classified and tax exempt within the region of Queens, such as Nova Scotia Power, for instance, as well as any municipal or provincial federal government properties. The lift to commercial taxable assessment, 16.1% in the region of Queens for this year. So outside of residential property, I think most folks in the room are familiar that we continue to see a strong market through 2022 for residential property, sort of right up to the end of the year, and that's reflected in this year's assessment roll based on that January 1st, 2023 base date. We're reflecting the market as of the end of 2022, essentially. So despite rising costs of building materials and labor, we continue to see strong commercial development throughout the province. We saw a lot of growth in business and industrial parks, continuing to see significant market growth as a result of the direction that the economy has been taking for those types of properties. We continue to see a really strong demand for multifamily property, both existing and new construction, indicating based on the significant need for housing that exists throughout the province of Nova Scotia, as many folks are aware. Investors are seeing a strong return on those types of buildings, and there's significant demand for them. We saw steady tenancy and increased leases in the retail sector, so still indicating a little bit of a shift in trend for retail, and office buildings remain flat, still in a bit of COVID-19 recovery with changes to the workforce for office buildings. I wanted to talk a little bit about natural disasters. I think fortunately, unlike some of the neighboring municipalities, Shelburne County, Barrington, and Municipality of Shelburne as well, that were much more significantly affected, of course, by the Barrington Lake wildfire, which I was significantly involved with. Our 2024 assessments consider the impact of the 2023 wildfires and flooding that took place throughout the province, and PBSC worked directly with impacted municipalities to share information and communicate that information with property owners. And we continue to monitor all of the impacted areas closely for rebuilding and market trends to indicate any stigma or any impact to the market in that area as a result of the fire. So I'll breeze through this quickly as we're sort of outside of this period now, given the date today. So we mailed the assessment notices January 8th, as Paul mentioned. The Assessment Act specifies 31 days to appeal annually, and that period ended February 8th, so last Thursday. Assessors are available to answer questions or discuss property details year-round. During the inquiry period, that 31-day period, we had 50 assessors available on our phone system as we see an increased call volume. We had just under 6,000 calls this year from property owners who wanted to talk about some of the reasons why their assessment had changed potentially year over year. We can discuss the appeal process and determine if that's an appropriate recommendation. We also have assessors available year-round, so if property owners want to contact us outside of the appeal period, we're always happy to have a look at the details for that specific assessment and make any changes that we see necessary for the next assessment roll year. So while the appeal period is closed now for this year, we can always make changes for the next assessment roll if there's physical changes to the property that aren't accurately reflected. So appeals can be emailed, mailed, or faxed. This is the same annually. Email is the vastly most popular choice at this point. So just our contact information is here as well. This is all available on our website at pvsc.ca. Anyone can phone the 1-800 number during business hours and speak with an assessor or a member of our administrative staff to do things like change a mailing address, for instance, if they haven't received an assessment notice. We also receive emails at inquiry@pvsc.ca, and we have a specific email address for municipal staff as well to contact us with any municipal inquiries. That's servicedesk@pvsc.ca, which is an express chain over to Paul here to my right. So I'll open up the floor to any questions, and again, thanks for allowing us to the time to do the presentation this morning. I know you have a busy meeting.
Thank you, Paul and Rod, and probably this is one of the things we hear the most of, so questions from councilors. Councillor Muse.
So, I got a couple of questions, and people's been calling me and asking me. So, if I bought a house, say for it was assessed at 89,000, and I paid 140,000, what would the assessment on the house be the next year?
So I think I'll say very specifically, it's really difficult to know exactly without knowing more about that individual assessment. So it's a bit of a, I need to know more information, I guess, around when did that purchase take place? What assessment year are we talking about? Was the property previously capped? And what's the data assessed to that property? So there's a couple of things that happen when we review a sales transaction. So we review residential sales transactions to determine if they represent the market. One of the things we do when we do that is look at the data that's assessed to that property to understand, is what's sold what's assessed? And what sometimes is the case, if there's a significant gap between assessed value and the sale price, oftentimes there's physical data physical data in that assessment account that's not accurately assessed. So there may have been some renovations that we weren't made aware of, something like a finished basement, this type of thing, a significant change in square footage. What that does when we correct that data is it allows us to understand better what to compare that property to. So rather than comparing it to other 1,000 square foot properties, let's say, we might compare it to other 1,600 or 1,700 square foot properties of similar age in a similar location, of course. What that does is that can change the assessment and move it or sort of close that gap a little bit between the assessed value originally. And the reason is not necessarily because we're looking at that sale price. In most cases, when we look at a sale, that sale is not in the assessments for the following year because we're 1 year retrospective. So that $140,000 sale may impact the assessment of all of the properties in that area a year and a half or sort of 2 assessment rolls out, if that makes sense. But the physical data can be assessed that year because we go up to December 1st, 1 month prior. So if the assessor looks at that $89,000 property and says, okay, well, the deck here is, double the size that it was before and much newer, and there's been 500 square feet of basement finish added, and they put a half bath on the main level, and maybe the kitchen's been done or something like that. So we would make those adjustments. That helps us to understand what was sold and capture that accurately. And additionally, it's very important for our reassessment process because remember, there's that significant gap in assessment initially. If we apply that to all of the properties, it would look like we were too light. Does that make sense? So we have to correct the data in order to determine what's the difference or the market impact there. And so to answer your question, what would the assessment be? I don't think I can answer it without more detail, but it really depends on the individual property and whether the distance between the assessment and the purchase price is entirely due to the market or whether it's also due to physical data that's not correctly assessed on that property. Does that answer your question?
I think it's fair to say that the sale price is not the assessed value per se. If you'll recall, during COVID, there were many people bidding on properties and there were multiple offers and things such as that. Quite often we saw that we have to say, is that true market value or not? So during COVID, quite often it would be that the prices were much higher than what would be true market value for the average willing buyer and willing seller. Many of them were sight unseen, that type of thing. So sale price does not equate to assessment value. It as a grouping, as Rod says, that shows us which ways the markets are moving for future rolls. But at the time, we have to look at the data and determine what the assessment is.
So, another question. How does the cap come off?
Sure, I'll try this one. Essentially, the cap, when the sale occurs, the cap comes off, unless it's a family sale, a near family member or a direct family member. So the cap comes off when the sale occurs, and then it won't come back on again until a year later. The property has to be reassessed. We have to set it at market value, and so in subsequent rolls, if it's eligible, then the cap will be applied. So we'll set it at market value, similar to your first question, and then that will be the number on the next roll. And then from there on in, it will go up by CPI. Whatever the CPI is, it'll go up that incremental amount every year. And remember, it can't go down. So even if CPI is negative, it can't go down because the cap legislation has no wording in it in respect to decreases in assessment value. It's only to protect against increases in market value.
Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Okay, I think one of the most significant questions that people have is they look at, in particular, say if somebody had a house and it was, say, $250,000, and they look at their bill and they see I forget what the terminologies are on the bills now, but the market value and the cap value. So they're saying, okay, it's capped at a certain amount, which means that cap value can only go up incrementally so much per year, right? So if it was $250,000, all of a sudden the assessed value this year goes up to, say, $350,000. It still goes back to that cap value, which protects the person who owns the house, right? And that can only go up, what, 3 point, you say 3?
So we're provided annually with the year-over-year CPI for Nova Scotia, all goods and services, timed up to the end of October 31st.
Yes, so when I look at that, so when they look at that, again, going back to that, say a $250,000 house that was capped at 250, so to speak, and it's was marketed at 350, and now it's gone up to 400. At 250 still applies with the 3.2%. If there's no significant amount of work being done, which would in turn increase the cap, right?
You're correct, exactly.
That's the biggest question people want to know.
Yeah.
Also, they see my assessment.
So
Way up here, and they're still only worried about the cap.
So the cap legislation is very specific, and as Paul mentioned, it's spike protection. So hypothetically speaking, and of course this is logistically unlikely to happen, but let's say the assessments increased by 100% year over year. The capped assessments would still only increase by that CPI. If it was 2% or if it was 5% or 8% or whatever. There's no relationship between what the assessments are doing due to market changes and what the cap is doing due to the CPI, as long as those properties remain eligible and there's no physical changes.
I think for property owners, that they'll usually, most of them, especially in case Queens this year, 86% of them will see two numbers, which is the market and the cap. So really, when they're looking at their assessment roll, they should say, does my market assessment seem reasonable, even though it's gone up 50 or 80,000 or whatever? Does that seem reasonable for market value? And then they see their cap as well, and that's what they're being taxed on, and it goes up by the CPI. So we get a lot of people that will appeal just because their market value went up quite a bit, even though they still have a cap. But they say, oh, why did my market value go up so much? Well, because that's the market. The last couple of years, that's the way it's been. So, so they have to keep in mind and decide. Certainly they can appeal based on my market value is not where I think it should be. But I think most people, even when they see their increases in their market value, typically say, well, if I was to sell the house, yes, I would be definitely at that number for sure. So anyways.
Other questions? Before I answer Councillor Mills, I'll take Councillor Brown, who has not yet spoken.
Thank you. My question was about cap eligibility. I had one resident who is owns a home in the Greenfield area, but is in the military, and they were denied the cap on their property because they're no longer a Nova Scotia resident, even though they're stationed outside of Canada. They live in military quarters, but they consider this their home. So they were just curious about how that works and if there's any exemption for military personnel.
Sure. And thank you, Councillor. It's a great question, and I think there's nothing specific in the cap regarding military and deployment. I would urge that property owner to give us a call and discuss the length of the deployment and whether the house is currently occupied, if family members that live there, if it's rented. There's a few different things I would look for there in terms of determining eligibility. It is something that I've run into before, and I think it really depends on the terms of the individual situation. To answer the question more specifically, there's nothing specific in Section 45A related to an exemption for the military. However, it's something we can talk about on an ad hoc basis. Typically, with shorter deployments, property owners are still sort of receiving notices to the property. That's their primary place of residence. They haven't purchased a property somewhere else. These are all things that we would look to sort of make a determination of eligibility. So I don't think I can answer that specific question in this forum, but I have seen it before, and certainly I'd urge them to give us a call.
And the definition relates to the number of days that you're in the province. So 183 days or more in the province. Doesn't have to be all at the same time. You could, you'd be in the province for a couple of months, then leave for a couple, and then go for a couple, and then come back again or whatever. But 183 days or more living in the province, and that's part of the definition as well. So.
Other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Hawks.
Yeah, if I make improvements to my property, does it raise the cap level or the market value?
Sure, if I've got that on. There we go. Both your taxable assessment, if you're eligible for cap, as well as your assessed value. How we adjust it is a little bit different. So let's say you're building a garage. I'll keep it straightforward. The cost to build that garage is, say, $30,000 or $40,000, something like that. Your typical garage. We get a building permit from the region of Queens. We determine if there's an inspection necessary. An assessor will visit the property, determine the sort of individual specifics, so the size and the quality of that structure, and whether it's complete for December 1st. If all of those things are in place, let's say, then we would add the garage to the assessment roll. The way your assessment moves is we're calculating with that data the contributory value of that garage. So the difference, let's just say, for example's sake, you have a 1,200 square foot bungalow that previously had no garage and now has a double garage adjacent to it. So we're determining with the assessed value the difference based on the market. So what are people willing to pay? What's the amount more that someone is willing to pay for a property with a garage versus without? Your cap is adjusted by cost. So we use a internationally recognized costing service to determine the total cost of a garage with those specific details. So it's not what you spent to build it. So if you let's say you build it yourself and your labor is sort of in-house, if you will, we're calculating labor as well. So we're using that costing manual to apply a uniform cost to the cap specifically for that garage. So I can't tell you what that number would be exactly because it changes year over year, but that's how your cap would be adjusted. So it's a cost-based adjustment, sort of a price per square foot based on the quality and the size, rather than a market contributory adjustment. And how those relate to one another depends on the market in the area. So it could be, and the degree to which you're improving the property. So, you know, your second or third double detached garage might not have the same contributory value as the first, as many people could understand. And we look at that as part of the assessed value. But the cost, the cap, would still be adjusted the same, just by the cost, basically. Does that answer your question, Councillor Hawks?
Other questions? Back to Councillor Muse.
So, a lot of people, like, the appeals, do you come out and look at the place? Because a lot of people, like, say, you know, mine went up $160,000, and do they look at the houses around me that, you know, they're run down and it's a lot of property that doesn't look great? But do you come out and look at places? No.
Absolutely. So I think how I'll answer it is we conducted 12,000 property inspections in the past year to look at various physical changes to property. So that would be, the vast majority would be building permits where we understand something is changing on a property. But we also do look at properties on appeal, and we look at properties for something like an inquiry, either from a municipality or a property owner. With appeals, the majority of appeals aren't required to be inspected. So if it's just a discussion on market value, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that the physical data assessed to the property is correct. If there appears to be an issue with that physical data, so our understanding of what's physically located on the property, or if there's a sort of an atypical nuisance, for instance, as you mentioned, so unsightly surrounding property, let's say, or a nuisance that's not immediately obvious as we do a desktop review. So something like a traffic influence, let's say you front a 100 series highway or something like that, that's usually relatively obvious to us from the office, and we can sort of calculate that impact or make sure that that impact is already factored into the assessment from a remote, from our home office. However, if there's something like significant physical damage to a property that we're not able to determine the extent of from the office, so let's say it's a flooded basement or fire damage, for instance, anything like that, where we often would ask an owner to provide us with photos, perhaps, and that helps to speed up the appeal process. So we don't visit every appeal. However, if an inspection is deemed necessary, so if it's sort of non-typical or atypical, then we absolutely would.
Are there any other questions? I do have one question from our neighbors, and I've read. So let's say with the loss of the homes and the fires, someone has a home and it's capped at $80,000, and it's a complete loss, and their neighborhood's a complete loss. They have insurance, and they rebuild their home. And suddenly their brand new home, because of the insurance rebuild, becomes assessed at $250,000. But the cap's been gone. Is the province looking at a change of legislation for communities in around Halifax area and Shelburne-Barrington area that have suffered these losses, and suddenly, because of the homes being rebuilt new, the cap's gone, and they are now looking at triple assessment? Is there any political talk respecting changes to that legislation to allow for those natural disasters?
Thanks for the question, Mayor Norman. I think what I'll say on legislation, and I'm glad you've introduced it sort of in this manner, that the cap really is provincial legislation. It's their jurisdiction. PBSC would have to be directed regarding any potential amendment to the act. As of this point, I'm not aware of anything happening with the province in that regard. What we have done internally regarding our treatment of cap due to a rebuild when there's been a total loss or partial loss due to something out of a property owner's control, right? So natural disaster, as was common with 86 properties in Shelburne County and 137 in HRM, so over 200 properties in the province. And this has been a very common question at other municipal councils, certainly those that were affected, and certainly happy to provide a little bit of rationale on it. So I think a really important piece around cap on a fire rebuild, let's say, is that when property owners rebuild, everyone will still be eligible for the cap if everything else remains the same. The reason that many property owners who've had significant damage wouldn't see a cap on their assessment this year is because they're now assessed for vacant land in 2024. So their assessed value is lower than the cap. Cap, remember, can't go down. It can only go up. So that cap, the eligibility doesn't disappear. The cap's still there in the background, but any future capped assessments will be calculated with this year's lower land assessment as the base point or the starting point. What we've committed to at PBSC around how we'll treat cap and rebuild post-fire is we've looked at every one of those properties that's been affected and determined what their cap benefit is, or the percentage difference between their taxable assessment, their cap, and their assessed value. So in your scenario, we had an $80,000 cap. Let's just keep the numbers easy and say the assessment was $100,000. So 20% cap benefit. So when a new property is constructed, we've said it'll be $250,000 once it's constructed, and you're absolutely correct. When a new structure is completed, of course, in some cases it may be significantly departed from what was there in terms of the actual building data. It's also much newer, therefore less depreciated, therefore very likely to be assessed for more. So what we would do is go out and assess that property through the permit process as we would with any other physical change that we look at on the roll throughout the province annually. And we would land on an assessment, and we land on a cap, and then all of those caps will be reviewed so that at the least, or at a minimum, that percentage value is restored. So in this scenario, we've got a 20% benefit that would be $50,000 off of $250,000, right? So the cap in this scenario would be $200,000 or less. It would be at a minimum that $200,000 figure. So we've committed to sort of carrying that percentage forward. There's nothing in the cap legislation or the attached regulations that allows PVSC to just allow property owners to keep the cap they had before. It's just non-existent in the legislation. So as you've introduced, it would really require direction from the province to be able to do that. But this is our current approach. We understand this to be sort of best practices and as empathetic as we can be to property owners that have been affected, while sort of continuing that benefit forward as new construction takes place.
Thank you. It's good to know, because I do know that was a concern from Shelburne. And
yeah, and it's been a very common question as Paul and I go around and do these meetings.
Seeing no other questions, I thank you for your presentation. I think it's a difficult world with having the cap, and I know there's municipalities that would like to see it removed. There's municipalities that think it should stay forever. That's provincial government decisions, but we are living in the world of a cap program, whether people feel it's fair or rather they feel it's unjust, because I think that's pretty 50-50 one way or the other, what the cap does. But anyway, I thank you, and councillors know how to reach you, and our viewing audience has the details. They're on our agenda, so thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you, Council.
carrying forward, we have guests from North Queens Active Living. We see them also once a year. It's always nice to hear the update of what they've been doing. As council will recall, North Queens Active Living came before us, I believe, in our first year, asking for support for a program that generates great community benefit. And they're here again to give us a report on what was accomplished last year with the funds that we provided. I think it was 16 plus 16,000, and you've done great things with it. So we'll just wait till you get settled and be on your way.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're here from North Queens Active Living. My name is Candace Fleming. I'm a lifelong resident of North Queens, and I'm your current active living coordinator in the area. And we're here today to share the work that we've done over the last year.
So my name is Alyssa Short. I'm the Active Living Society Chair. Thank you all for having us. This is baby Lorella. I've been the chair of the Active Living Committee for a few years now, and have been a resident of North Queens for 7 years. So it's really nice to be able to contribute back to the community through this project. I think some of you are familiar with our project because, as Mayor Norman said, we've been funded for 3 years now by the region. The project was started initially in 2018 by a group that included representation from the municipality, the province, Nova Scotia Health, the school board, and then quite a few community members as well. We were a pilot under the North Queens Business Hub until last year when we registered as a nonprofit society. So we're now our own standalone organization. The intention behind the project is to set it up as really a model program for a way that a rural community can introduce active living, health programs, sports, physical activity into a rural community, which has a unique setting and is different than the challenges that are experienced in municipal settings or in more populated areas. So we really wanted to have a pilot that could then be maybe replicated in other communities in Queens County and other places. The project centers around the role of the active living coordinator, which is Candace. It's a part-time paid position that focuses on engaging with community members, supporting volunteers to develop and lead activities, and promoting the use of community facilities and spaces. So a big part of the project initially was to increase the community use of our school, because that's such an important resource that we have in North Queens. And then it also increases the use of other facilities like our community halls, our fire station, our parks, trails, all of those things. So yeah, and Candace is really, the role is a coordinator role. So it's really important that it's not just about facilitating, it's about really getting the local people to be able to lead their own activities and to get them to take the lead and increase volunteerism and really championing them to start programs and activities that they really want to see in their own community.
Start again. Here are some examples of the programming we've offered in 2023. I was thrilled to collaborate with the Region of Queens Director of Recreation and Healthy Communities, Megan, as well as our MPAL, Kimberly Halliday, to bring some suitable programming and initiatives to North Queens. It's been great to see the programs come to life. Also, we do provide support to our local Board of Trade. This past year, we worked with them quite a bit to we've been working on revitalizing our trail behind our ballpark, and it's come a long way. And this spring, it will see a lot of use. One program that we would like to highlight also is the Gentle Yoga for Seniors, which was a small grant opportunity that we were successful in, and it has brought yoga to North Queens, which hasn't been there, I believe, for 7 years. And currently we have 18 yogis doing yoga once a week and loving it. I do have some testimonials here from people who have enjoyed our programming over the last 12 months. Testimonials offer an authentic insight into the experiences users have had with your programs. And here you can see that we've received lots of positive feedback. One of our programs, Gentle Yoga for Senior, has been receiving a ton of praise from participants within the community and has grown from 12 users at the beginning to now 18 users, and will soon be a fully, what is that called when it's all on their own? When it's a self-funded program. It will become a self-funded program very shortly. Judy Wombold is a strong supporter of this yoga program, and I hear from her quite often how lovely it is and how just happy the community is to have it in our area. When we look at the toddler multi-sport, it often seemed like the parents were having just as much fun as the kids. The ability to connect face-to-face with other parents is invaluable to one's mental health and well-being. Dolly is a mom of 2 young kids and highlighted this in her testimonial. These are some photos from our open gym night, which happened on Fridays. As you can see, there's always a variety of sports happening, from stacking cups to basketball, volleyball, and every now and then a dodgeball game will break out. We've seen everything from grandparents come with their grandchildren to play, to kids who wanted more time to spend on their chosen sport in school. And as you can see, something fun is always happening. Our Storybook Trail is another hit. This year we tried to focus more on having books come from local authors, local illustrators, and we will have another book started in probably April when the snow goes and the trail is accessible again. Youth softball. A lot of fun was had during youth softball this past year. Participants were ready to learn and have fun and gave it their best try every week. Coach Rhodes enjoyed volunteering her time with the littles, and it was easy to see that everybody had a great time and, learned some new skills. Lots of fun was also had during toddler multisport. It was a blast every week. We had about 20 toddlers inside the fence at the ball field, playing a multitude of sports and, just being in a safe environment to do so, run and have fun. One of my favorite parts of that program was watching the parents and the children play together and laugh and have a great time. And another highlight was also the gathering of all of the parents to chat and mingle and get to build relationships with each other. Community basketball is one of our newer events that started, and on our very first night there were 31 men and women that showed up. That's a really excellent turnout for North Queens. It was really great to see. One of the other ones is beach volleyball, which has grown in North Queens and it just keeps getting bigger every year. This past year, we had several players even traveling from other counties to come in and play volleyball on our courts because it just wasn't available in their own counties. We hosted a few tournaments this year, and our local volunteer, Sheila, can't wait for summer to start so they can get back out there.
All right, so I'll turn that on. So yeah, as you can hear, we've got so much going on, and it's really nice. The community volleyball, if you're ever driving through North Queens in the summer, the court is just packed sometimes, and that's a really nice thing to see in such a small rural community, to see people getting out, and it's young and old. There's little kids playing, there's all the way up to seniors, families, and it's just really nice for me as a resident of North Queens to see that, and to see that kind of community happening in such a healthy way. So our vision is really to make the active living coordinator position a permanent feature of North Queens. There is so much momentum now behind the role. People are really starting to know that they can reach out to the coordinator to help them schedule, to help them get access to resources, to help write small grant proposals, that kind of thing. So it does take a while in a small community to really trust that a position like this is going to stay, and to get people to buy into that. And we're really seeing it now, which is great. So I think if you can go to the next slide. So this is our proposed budget for the year. It's pretty much the same as it has been the last few years. The main cost is for the part-time position. And then we have some funds in there for just materials and equipment and things, although we also do our own fundraising to cover those costs. Our request from the region is the same as it was again last year, and then we're also have been indicated from RCE that they're going to fund us again, which they did the last few years as well. And then we'd also be really open to a conversation about longer term funding, if that's something that you guys would be willing to discuss, because it would really allow us to plan longer term projects, so that we're not just going year to year. There's a few things like bigger infrastructure projects that we'd like to invest some time in. There's a few different community groups that would like some support in getting things going, like our field at our school is not in great shape, and we're looking at some grant opportunities to apply, although that's a multi-year commitment if we're going to do something like that. Same thing for Harmony Park, although there's some great work that already happened there this last year. So yeah, that's a discussion that we'd be open to if you guys would be willing to discuss it. Yeah, and then the last slide just shows some of the other funding that we're pursuing. We did explore user fees this summer. The toddler multi-sport had a small fee associated with it. We don't want it to be a barrier for participation. That's a really big thing. We don't want people to decide not to show up because they don't want to pay a fee. So we're kind of discussing options with community members on that. And then, yeah, we continue to apply for small grants for specific activities like the gentle yoga. We had one the previous year for a skating rink. We have one for a transportation grant, which is something we're still working on, trying to figure out how to make it possible. It basically would be to help with the cost of getting kids into school programs and into other sports where there's a lot of travel involved, given that we're rural. So that's something that Candace is supporting as we try to pilot that idea. Yeah, and then we also get contributions from our local community when we're doing fundraising, and they help us with storing equipment and donating for fundraising activities. So I think that's it. Yeah. So in closing, I'd like to thank all of you for having us again. Again, as I said at the beginning, I really do love being part of this project. being active and healthy is something that's very important to me, and it's really nice to be able to take my kids out to some of these things and yeah, give them these opportunities. So thank you all for the support for this over the last few years.
And thank you. And are there any questions of Candace or Alyssa?
I'm not sure what's happening with this mic here. How great this program is. I think your numbers are incredible, and I think this program is a really great way for the region to support North Queens, given how far it would take to travel to come in for soccer and things like that. I remember last year, I think there was an issue with the soccer programming maintaining, but the numbers that came out in the beginning were really great, and I just think that it's important not to have barriers. A 45-minute drive to take for a sport for those who can even get there. So this is incredible, and I think it's really great, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Brown.
I think this is a great program, and it seems that you've come a long way with it. I'm really happy to see it. I'd like to see it expand to all of North Queens. I'm in the Greenfield area. We have a fully functional gym there. There's another basketball court at the Pine Dome. Greenfield Rec has put a new park in. They've got disc golf setups that they've put in, fitness facilities outside. And they're looking at refurbishing the ball field. So, they're looking. I'd like to see you guys partner with them so that all of North Queens can benefit from this, and we can have programs spread all across, which would be really nice. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to say to both of those comments, both to expanding to all of North Queens and also just the general impact of the program. I think, as we said, like, we really wanted to set this up as a pilot and as an example to other communities for what's possible in terms of active living. So expanding and covering more of our area is something that we're working towards. And then if there are people interested in your regions, I don't know where all of you are representing, but we would, I think, absolutely be happy to coordinate with people who would want to take on a project like this in their region, give them advice, and really collaborate on what we have learned through the project in the last few years, if that ever comes up for you guys.
Are there other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Yeah, so I've really enjoyed watching it grow as it is, because of course that's where all my family is out there. So I've seen it and watched it happen. It's so different between different areas. I mean, in South Queens here we still have a lot of volunteers who take over groups like Ivan Higgins with basketball, with badminton. There's people who are here, but Ivan Higgins isn't going to be here forever. But there's got to be others who do those things. Well, you have such an expanse area to try to draw people in. And when this COVID hit, it affected everyone everywhere where growth took place. And if you don't draw them in, first thing they're going to do is move out, because they need to have something to be able to go forward to. And as Councillor Brown said, maybe it's time, because it's been asked before, about how can we work this together, if we could be able to, and maybe you could make it into an expanded role that could, but I'll also ask with this, and I'd like to see that. When I saw that Facebook post the other day with 31 people up to the basketball, wow, that's incredible. What you fellas have been able to create is things like mixed lob ball tournaments. We've lost our lob ball in here, but you fellas have still got it out there. So every area is different, and we got to be able to hit each area where they're at. But it's getting back to what Councillor Brown said there about us getting something that could be coordinated together, and it's time to talk about it. I'm concerned. You talked about this as a pilot program. It ends this year. Your pilot program. You said it's your pilot's finished.
We are. I mean, now that we're established as a society, I would say that we're kind of past the pilot phase, and we really are wanting to make this a permanent program. I think one thing that we've really learned, especially because we did have a coordinator one year who was from Greenfield actually, and she wasn't really tied into the North Queens community. She didn't have the kind of connections that somebody who's been born and raised there has, and we really found that while she did some great activities, the community, because they didn't know her, they didn't really work with her as much, and so we didn't get the kind of momentum that we did when we then switched the coordinator to have Candace and then previously Tara, who are both born and raised in North Queens. They really were able to get this going to the point that we're at now, and I think that's a really key thing that we've learned, is that while we do want to increase coordination and we do work with the like Kim, and yeah, there is collaboration that way, but I think it really does take somebody local to actually get the things going, and I think that's really the key learning that we've taken from the last few years on this.
I don't know what, my mic keeps going off. I don't shut it off, it just keeps going off. You are right. You are 100% right, and people don't understand that. We had sent out transit out to Caledonia and said free drive into hockey games, and we had hockey games. Sent it out, nobody came in. It takes local. That you have to have the I guess the assurance and the feel good about the people that you're working around. So it takes it's different, and people have to understand that. So yes, I support you fellows 100% with this. There's one little thing that would concern me is I know they have a group out there meet with seniors who meet. I think it's Georgie's, isn't it, or something like that? But I think that's coming to an end. Isn't it? Well, that's what I've heard. But if it is, or something like that, would you guys be interested in? And I guess just thinking about it that way is, there's so many groups you don't want to lose that when we go forward.
Sorry, I turned it on. I have met with the seniors, and I haven't heard that they're disbanding, but that is somebody that we collaborate with on a regular basis. So if that were to happen, like, of course, we would try to step in and help them as much as possible. Yeah.
It's definitely not just about sports and or like really physical stuff. It's also just meetings and we could do like a cooking. There's been talk on that. Healthy eating or walking, or it can really be any kind of healthy activity, whether it's like mental health or physical and active things. So.
Seeing no other questions, Candace and Alyssa, and Councillor Brown, you have one more comment?
I just wanted to comment that I keep bringing up about Greenfield because we're considered North Queens. So we're left out of the South Queens, but when I hear the discussions about North Queens, it's only about Caledonia. So, I'd really like this to be fully inclusive of all North Queens and see the people out there be able to take part in this somehow, like a partnership. And just to remember, North Queens ends at the 210.
Yeah. I was just going to say.
And just so you're aware, we actually do have a collaboration coming up with some folks from Greenfield to start an exercise class in North Queens. So she's going to start coming out.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
On that note, I would like to thank you, Alyssa, and your little one, and Candace. You will note later on in discussion there is an item 8.4 North Queens Active Living Request. There will be no decisions made during that discussion. It's simply for council to decide if they wish to have your request. And I've made a note for long-term funding or yearly funding included as part of our upcoming budget with report from staff. So no decisions during that discussion other than does council wish to move your request forward to budget discussions. So I thank you for all you do in North Queens, and it's great. And I know Councillor Brown spoke and asked the same question last year, respecting a relationship between Caledonia and the Greenfield community. And I believe the answer was, you know, if there are volunteers within the Greenfield community who wish to engage and be part of, but as a part-time coordinator, I believe it's difficult to move that far. But I know, Councillor Brown, if there are volunteers in Greenfield who wish to engage with Candace and help grow the program, then I know they'll be more than happy to do that. So safe journeys home, and thank you again. It's always great to see you. Four point zero, tabling of petitions. Are there any petitions to table today? Seeing none, public question comment session. I ask anyone who wishes to speak. The microphone is here. One has 5 minutes during this session. However, and we'll just leave it at that. So, yes. Name and civic address. Your residential civic address.
Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. I am Karen Gilmore. I reside at 348 Highway 8 in Milton, Nova Scotia, and I'm here on behalf of my husband, who is away working currently with regard to item 7.4, I think, on your 5 on your agenda, which is 90 Common Street. So my husband is the owner of the property at 90 Common Street, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this council regarding the recommendations made by law enforcement concerning the property in question. Firstly, I want to express our sincere commitment to resolving the issues surrounding the property and our eagerness to contribute positively to our community, particularly the current housing crisis that that Nova Scotia is facing. It is evident that the state of the building at 90 Common Street is a concern, and we acknowledge a need for action. However, I urge council to consider the broader context and potential opportunities associated with this property. My husband's intention is not to neglect the property, but rather transform it into much needed affordable housing units for our community. We have initiated discussions with relevant stakeholders, including the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing, to explore funding opportunities and ensure that our proposed development aligns with their priorities of addressing the housing crisis. Given the complexities involved in repurposing a derelict building and the potential impact on our plans as we explore developing affordable housing, I respectfully request that council consider alternative measures before proceeding with the recommendation presented to you today. Specifically, we propose the following steps. 1, to allow us the necessary time to secure the open wall in the building, preferably just due to the season and the availability of contractors. We're looking for 60 days for that to happen, to allow us to find someone to do the work and then allow for it to be completed. It's a small section of wall that is open, and we believe that can be made secure. And once the building is secure, we would be undertaking consultations with contractors to assess the viability of the building. Chris was in there in the summer and does believe that a large portion of that can be salvaged. And because he's away working, he is committed to addressing that issue as soon as he returns. Given his schedule, that may not be until May until we can learn the full condition of the building. But during that period, we do plan to drop a comprehensive plan for the affordable housing development program. Preparation for that would include confirmation of zoning, amalgamation of the 2 PIDs that are involved, environmental and land assessments, revised architectural plans, and a proposal for funding support. Following this phase, and pending ADHP approval, we will proceed with the necessary site prep and construction. And should it be determined that the building is deemed beyond repair, we would of course immediately commence the demolition process and update the municipality on a completion date at ASAP. 30 days is not enough time for all of this to happen, and request 90 to 120 days. And an updated timeline could then be provided at that time, and again, following the ADHP decision. I want to emphasize that the ultimate goal is to contribute positively to the community by providing affordable housing options. A decision to proceed with a 30-day order, as recommended, will hinder advancement to our ultimate goal, and if we are unable to complete the work on time, there is greater concern of how a lien might impact funding and program approval. Should our proposal to the ADHP be denied, we will explore alternative options for development, such as the original 3-building unit that Chris had planned. The ADHP proposal would actually contain 5 units. In conclusion, I respectfully urge the council to consider our proposal and grant us the opportunity to pursue our vision for the property at 90 Common Street. We are committed to working collaboratively with council and other stakeholders to find a mutually beneficial solution to address both the immediate concerns regarding the building's condition and the long-term need for affordable housing in our community. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Anyone else who wishes to speak? Approval of regular council minutes, January 23rd, 2024. Moved by Councillor Charlton, seconded by Councillor Hawks. All those in favor? Passed. Diversity and Inclusion Action Team, a new member. There is a recommendation. Hello, Ms. Johnston. There is a recommendation within the package. Councillor Brown.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality appoint Jamie Wynot to the Diversity and Inclusion Action Team.
And that is seconded by Deputy Mayor Fancy. Ms. Johnston.
Good morning. Should be brief. We all know about the Diversity, Inclusion, and Action Team. It's 10 members of the public. We had some turnover early on. We had some calls for applicants, and we received Jamie Wynot, who works at the Department of Community Services, and she sees a number of people from various backgrounds, fairly marginalized, mostly with the low income, and with her intersectionality perspective and a lot of her training, as much as she doesn't identify as any particular group, we felt the team agreed that she would be an asset and approves her recommendation to you.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Johnston? It's great to hear that it comes from within the team that makes the recommendations. It's wonderful. Any questions before I ask for the question? It looks like we're going to be welcoming Jamie to the team. All those in favor? Contrary? Thank you. Pre-approval for debenture issuance. This is a practice that we undertake when we have completed projects and then look for financing. Ms. Vino. There is a recommendation to make first. Councillor Brown.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality passes the resolution for pre-approval of debenture issuance subject to interest rates as attached to this staff report.
And that is seconded by Councillor Charlton. Ms. V.
Thank you, Mayor Norman. Good morning, Council. This is just another step in the process that we have for borrowing to fund the Main Street project that was completed last fiscal year. It was part of the capital investment plan that we would borrow to cover the cost of this project. So staff brought the pre-approval temporary boring agreement, and now this step is resolution for pre-approval of debenture issuance subject to interest rate. Once staff has this resolution from council, I can proceed with the application and get the region included in the issuance that will be happening this spring.
Any questions of Ms. Fino? Hearing none. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. And Ms. Fino is going to remain. And 7.3, Policy 82, Fire Department Capital Purchases and Operating Grant Adoption. Again, there is a recommendation that comes after discussion at past meetings. Deputy Mayor Fancy.
I also recommend that the council of the region of Queen. I pressed it. Did you want me to go through that again for the public? I know it keeps going out on me. I also recommend that the Council of the Region of Queens Municipality adopt revised Policy 82, Fire Department Capital Purchases and Operating Grants as presented.
And then seconded by Councillor Romero. Are there any questions respecting this? I believe we've talked this well past the point of approval. Seeing Councillor Brown?
Yeah, just when I looked at the schedule, the only concern I have is that a couple of the purchases look like fire departments are scheduled to purchase vehicles back-to-back years. Is there a real feeling that from those departments that they can handle that funding of like $2 million in 2 years for trucks?
That's a question that you'd have to really bring up to the Emergency Services Committee. I am just the conduit that communicates to council the requests. I know that there were no significant changes in timing from the schedule that I kind of inherited 3 years ago, with the exception of one truck from Greenfield, which was moved up. So I can't really answer that specifically. What I do know is that all the chiefs agreed to this schedule, and that it was a consensus of all. So my assumption is that yes, they require these trucks, and if it looks back to back, perhaps one was a pumper and one was a tanker, one was a ladder and one was an aerial. I don't know.
Thanks. I just was curious if it came up in the discussion of the committee, and I wasn't aware if you were in the committee discussions or not. So.
Are there any other? Deputy Mayor Fancy?
I know in our discussions, as you look at, we're looking at more of a 2-year program of looking back at this. Monies is always going to be an issue. So we'll have to wait to see. They all agreed to go along with the schedule, and we'll see how it all works out that. But we're going to be going back every 2 years to look at this to make sure that it's operable and works for us.
Magic. Through the mayor, just to Councillor Brown to answer, I know that several departments indicated to me they weren't sure. They were worried whether they could make that happen, but they certainly didn't ask for it to be changed at this point. So I think their thought was we're going to sort of work towards it, see how it sort of works out. I think a number of things that may impact that are for example, interest rates. You know, what changes will those have on the financial impact? So it's hard to know, but yes, it did come up, and they aren't sure.
Seeing no other questions or comments, I'll ask for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Unanimous. And now Director Grant. Solid Waste Management Facility tipping fees will join. No, Director Grant's name is on there as well. There is a motion within the package. Councillor Charlton.
I so move that the Council of the Region of Queens Municipality approve the proposed tipping fee schedule for residual municipal solid waste, sorted construction and demolition material, mixed construction and demolition material, blue bag recyclables, organics, metal, and contaminated soil.
And that is seconded by Councillor Muse. As we know, this is built into the formula, but if you could just do a quick explanation for our audience who may not have an agenda.
So what happens every year is this report is prepared by finance staff and it's brought to council to approve. The rates are increased based on, I think is it a 10-year average CPI increase. What we can adjust outside of that is the post-closure amount, which we did have to increase last year because of the document that we had, the comprehensive review. If you remember, we brought it to council because our post-closure costs were significantly undervalued at the time, so we had to make some adjustments for that. As I noted in the staff report, commercial customers inside or outside of Queens will pay an increased closure cost for residual waste of $37.38 per ton, which is an increase of 25% on that post-closure portion. The actual cost per ton for closure and post-closure costs based on the study completed last year is $65.65. So we're still only recovering 57% of the estimated closure and post-closure costs per ton being charged to users. So we operate with this schedule for last year's numbers because I won't have the revised post-closure numbers for this fiscal year until we finish this fiscal year, and we're looking at the tonnage that was used, so we have to base it on last year's numbers.
Questions? I see there are no questions. I just want to make my comment I always make, and that is that I know it's difficult. Residential people living in Queens are always relieved with no charge for sorted C&D, no charge for municipal solid waste. But I always look to the commercial end, and I always question and would like to see waste generated outside of Queens a little heavier in the costs than what we pay within Queens. But I know that's it's the way it is. So I'll call for on that. I am going to, did you have a question? Deputy Fancy?
Yes. When we talk about blue bag recyclables, you know, of course, of January 1st, we became a two-stream blue bag, right? So does that cover that? Like, because I know we're going into that, but I don't hear anything about it. So I don't know where are we with that.
So that's correct. It's still the same disposal fee regardless of the two-stream separation.
Seeing no other questions, I'm going to call for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. 7.5 Common Street, Liverpool. Staff do have a recommendation within the package. Councillor, we'll just wait for a moment and staff settle in. Councillor Gidney.
Thank you. I recommend that the region of Queens Municipality Council declares the property located at 90 Common Street, Liverpool, Queens County, Nova Scotia, and identified as PID number 700-16431 as dangerous or unsightly as defined in the Municipal Government Act of Nova Scotia. In that an order be served upon the owner of the property requiring that within 30 days of the date of the service of the order, the following work be carried out. Number 1, demolition of existing building located at 90 Common Street, Liverpool, Nova Scotia. Number 2, demolition of one outbuilding. Number 3, full cleanup of construction and demolition materials and transport to the Regional Queens landfill facility and leveling of the property accordingly. And number 4, clean up miscellaneous items strewn about the property, including plastics, metals, shingles, glass, etc. And that if the owner fails to comply with the order, the administrator may cause the requirements of the order to be carried out, and all expenses incurred by the Region of Queens Municipality become responsibility of the property owner.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Brown. A bit of explanation, background, please.
Yes, good morning. So just background in regards to this property, 90 Common Street, Liverpool, PID 70016431. So 90 Common Street, Liverpool is a property that's been on the bylaw enforcement roster since February 2009. At that time, it had different owners, and a great deal of work was required to bring it up to neighborhood standards due to the ongoing complaints. It was an issue to be brought before council. However, in the same year, 2 new owners took title of the property. One of those owners is still on title, and the other has since been removed. As the property had new owners, the process began again. During this time, complaints continued to be lodged, and the property continued to deteriorate. Such actions were required, such as boarding up the property for public safety and keeping the yard clean due to unsightly issues. In 2015, the owner obtained a demolition permit to see the building demolished by May 13th, 2016. This never happened. The property was again secured and mowed with no work being done to upgrade or stabilize the ongoing deterioration of the property. The owner complied on many occasions to requests for cleanup. However, after many years of vacancy, the building further deteriorated. So then in 2017, a fire broke out inside the building. The fire caused extensive damage to the property, which can be visible from the outside. In addition to burnt away pieces of the roof, so that rain and other elements could now pour in. People continued to break into the property and spray paint profanities on it. So complaints continued to come in, and additional complaints from the RCMP and officer safety concerns were also starting to be lodged with us. As the years went on, the property continued to deteriorate from unsightly concern to safety concern. And on April 1st, 2020, the Region of Queens building official, William Layton, conducted an external inspection and felt that, and I quote, "Given the present poor condition of the building and the fact that unknown persons continue to use the premises as a hangout, it was his recommendation that the building be demolished as soon as possible." Staff again continued to discuss the condition of the property with the owner, and the owner advised he would remedy the issue. In March of 2021, as regular complaints of unsightly continued, the owner advised plans were taking place to have it demolished and a new rental property built over top. In May 2021, after nothing appeared to be happening, the owner was contacted. He advised that due to COVID-19 lockdowns, there's nothing he could do. As such, he was given more time to remedy the dangerous and unsightly concerns. In September 2022, the owner applied for a building permit, again under the premise that the structure would be built into a rental apartment unit. Municipal building officials requested additional information, such as structural reports, planning details, and a new demolition permit. They received nothing back as of this date. In May of 2023, after ample time had been given to allow for planning and work to be completed, a follow-up site inspection took place by bylaw enforcement. During this follow-up, the property was again noticed insecure, unsightly, and deteriorating further. The owner was contacted, who advised he still had plans to renovate the property, that he had obtained a development permit and was waiting on Nova Scotia Power to install a power pole. The power pole was installed, however, no building permit was ever obtained. On December 13th, 2023, a complaint regarding the dangerous condition of the building was received. Bylaw enforcement officers attended and observed the building was once again broken into, with several open entrances, deteriorated further, graffitied, and one entire exterior wall had collapsed away from the structure. In addition, the roof had collapsed in some portions due to deterioration and the interior past fire damage. This property can no longer be secured. It appears to be collapsing in on itself and presents a clear and present danger to the public. The owner has had numerous years to address these concerns. He has applied for permits over the years and never followed through. He has communicated that he intends to renovate the property into a rental apartment over the years, but never followed through. Structural integrity is the keynote here now. The building is a possible threat to public safety. Thank you.
Questions or comments from council? Councillor Gidney.
Just one, can we determine if that has to be demolished now? Like, I know that Mr. Layton did an outside, but can we go inside? Can we get authorization to go inside and to verify if it can be repaired or if it has to be demolished? Should that be a step that we should take?
So for our role and responsibilities, typically we aren't allowed inside of a building. We can only make judgment based off of what we can see directly on the outside. Of course, the only reason why we are aware of what some of the interior of the building looks like and the condition is in, just because of the wall that had collapsed away. So we can clearly visibly see inside. We were there yesterday. Just as part of our process to make sure nothing's changed prior to coming here. I guess with the continued snow and harsh elements, it now looks as if parts of the floor are now starting to collapse as well. We noticed large gaps. Of course, if anybody were to climb in there, it would appear that they would most likely fall through and into the basement.
Under the circumstances here, like with all everything that's transpired in the last 9 years, I can't see holding this off any longer. I sympathize with what she has to say. I can appreciate, but history is repeating itself here, and I think we've got to do something now. Thank you.
Other comments? Councillor Charlton.
So just to clarify from Councillor Gidney's comment, I understand you can't go inside. That would have been the report that you would have received when there was a mention of a building permit, or if I'm understanding correctly, there should have been a report come through to the municipality that said if that building could be, partially torn down or renovated or and we have not received a report like that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. In the, I believe it was the 2022, at the time, Region Queen's employee did request that kind of information, would need a structural report, various other reports, insulation, all that kind of stuff before proceeding. Those requests were made and we have not received anything.
And just also to clarify, how long has the wall been opened up where people could just walk in and be at a risk such as that?
We checked on the property after receiving a complaint of the wall having collapsed, and that was December 13th, 2023. So we can confirm it's been at least that long.
Councillor Charlton, are you finished? Any other councillors wish to comment? Councillor Romero?
So they have made no motions to board in this wall?
No, not at this time. I think it was communicated to the owner, but unfortunately, no, the wall is still wide open.
Any other comments? I'll just remind council that in the past, when we've issued demolition permits, staff are very helpful to the owner, respecting contractors that do the work. Finance department is very good about arranging payment for lien. We have to take this case per case. And with no other councillors wishing to comment, I am going to call the question. All those in favor? Which light on?
So in regards to, I guess I'm just asking for some history, not particularly with this project or property rather, but other properties that are deemed unsafe. I'm thinking of like the former Wong's building and things like that. Were the timelines similar in the demolition of like the 30 days, for example?
The timelines have been minimum 30 days.
So to continue on, I am going to ask for a question on the motion as presented. All those in favor? Opposed? Passed.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Plaques and Old Burial Ground, Liverpool? No, solid, right. Plaques and Old Burial Ground, Liverpool, 7.6. Mr. Director McLeod. There is a recommendation. Councillor Brown.
I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality request that staff conduct further research into the potential rewording of heritage plaques in the old burial ground in Liverpool.
And that is seconded by Councillor Hawks. Director McLeod.
Yes, Mayor Norman, just a little bit of background. The municipality has received an expression of concern from a member of the public respecting the wording on one of the historic plaques that are located within the old burial ground in Liverpool. As I think you're all aware, the old burial ground is owned by the Region of Queens Municipality and is also a registered heritage property. The three plaques that are located within the burial ground were installed under the direction of the municipality back in 2004, and the plaques themselves were prepared in consultation with representatives from the Queens County Historical Society. So I guess the concern that was submitted to the municipality was forwarded to the municipality's Diversity and Inclusion Action Team to review with the lens on equity, diversity, and inclusion. The DIAT team made a number of observations and suggestions for potential changes that could be made to the wording of the plaques. The concern was also brought forward to the region's Heritage Advisory Committee as it is a registered municipal heritage property. And the committee discussed at length the concern and understood what was the concern that was being expressed, and they were open to investigating alternative texts and potential revisions to the plaques. The committee also felt that it was important prior to any moving forward with amendments to the plaques that additional consultation was necessary through groups such as Acadia First Nations, Native Council of Nova Scotia, and the Black Cultural Centre of Nova Scotia. The committee suggested that prior to proceeding with this additional consultation that this matter be brought forward to council for direction and any action that may be necessary. So the recommendation is included that staff proceed with further investigation towards potential rewording of the plaques.
Thank you, Director McLeod. So as he noted, it's a report looking at other interpretive panels, replacements, and things are not considered as part of this. It's just whether or not we support DIAD in their request that further investigation be undertaken. Are there any questions to Director McLeod before I ask for the question? Councillor Brown.
Yeah, it's this one strikes quite close to home to me because William and Mary Freeman were my direct ancestors, and you know, for them to at that time in that cultural position put Violet in the family gravesite puts quite a value on her person. And I think we try to recognize that, but we're in different times now, and our wording has to reflect that. And I think we have a chance here to rectify some past hurts that were done to people. So I think it's well worth going ahead and seeing how we can make this better, because that's our job as councillors, is to make life better for all of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Are there any other comments before I call the question? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? Passed unanimously. I'm going to call a quick 10-minute recess to give people time to stand up and stretch their legs, and we will resume at 10:50. Thank you. It is 10:50. We're reconvening our meeting. 7.7, Development Agreement Amendment with Queens Enviro Center. There is a recommendation within your package. Councillor Romero.
I move the Council of Region of Queens Municipality adopt an administrative policy respecting a development agreement amendment to allow for the replacement of a section of vegetative buffer on the eastern side of PID numbers 700-83902 with an opaque fence.
Seconded by Councillor Gidney. Dr. McLeod.
Yes, Mayor Norman. Back in 2020, Council entered into a development agreement to allow for the establishment of a recycling depot and processing operation at the property at 3965 Highway 3 in Brooklyn. The owners of the property have now applied for an amendment to that development agreement. The amendment would see the replacement of a section of vegetative buffer with an opaque fence. Under the development agreement, there have been a number of clauses included to mitigate potential conflicts that the proposed recycling use would have with the abutting residential properties. One of those being that a vegetative buffer be maintained at all times between the subject lands and the adjacent properties to the east and west of the operation. So I guess the request of the owners to amend to allow for the inclusion of an opaque fence is in line with, I guess the amendment itself is in line with the conditions of the development agreement, which allows council to consider non-substantive amendments such as this to the agreement. So some particulars with the property, as I had indicated, the property is at 3965 Highway 3 in Brooklyn. It will be the old Queens Chrysler building. The property itself is 3.36 acres in size and 158 feet of road frontage. The area is a mix of commercial and low-density residential development. The development agreement that is in place allows for this use. So with the owners looking at replacing, I guess the intent of the retention of the vegetative buffer was essentially to provide that buffer area between the commercial operation and the surrounding residential properties. So with that, the replacement of that vegetative buffer with an opaque fence is really serving the same purpose. So when staff looked at the amendment request, they were of the opinion that it was essentially serving the same purposes and are supportive of this amendment application.
Any questions or comments to Dr. McLeod? Councillor Romero.
I see no problem with this request. They have done considerable improvements inside and outside of this facility, and I see they've acquired maritime fence to place the fence, so I have no problem with it whatsoever.
Any other questions or comments before Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Yeah, so all we have to do is go over by it and know what it looked like before and look like it today. We would not recognize what business was there before. They've done significant improvements, everything they've done is just to beautify it. I have no problems.
Seeing no other comments, I'm going to call for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Unanimous. 7.8, large-scale wind farm development by development agreement. There is a recommendation within the package. If someone would like to make that recommendation. Councillor Brown.
Sorry, my apologies. I recommend that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality give notice of its intention to enter into a development agreement with Mersey River Wind Incorporated to allow for the establishment of a 33 turbine generator wind farm development on portions of properties identified as PID numbers 702-47176, 702-47192, 702-47184, 702-47200, 702-64213, 702-25420, 702-25404, 702-47218, 702-47168, 700-32982, 702-60575, 702-48695, and 701-66988, and that a public hearing be held on March 12th, 2024 in the council chambers of the municipal building, 249 White Point Road in Liverpool, Nova Scotia at 9 a.m.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Charlton. And Director McLeod will give us a bit of background information, but you can tell from within your package that these are all Crown Land PIDs. And while Mersey River Farm has not yet secured an official lease of these lands, they do have an order of council indicating that they will be leasing them. So the development agreement will only be acted upon once the lease is obtained officially from the province. And on that note, Director McLeod can give us some background information on public meetings and other matters surrounding development agreements and large-scale wind turbines within Queens.
Yes, Mayor Norman. So as been indicated, we've received a formal application to enter into a development agreement for a large-scale wind turbine operation located west of the Mersey River in Milton. There are 13 parcels of Crown land that will be subject to the development agreement, and I apologize, Councillor Brown, for including all the PIDs in the recommendation. But so there's 13 PIDs or properties that are would be involved in this development agreement application. The properties are all zoned as inland rural R5 under the land use bylaw, which does not permit large-scale wind turbine operations as of right. But the region's municipal planning strategy does contain policy whereby council can consider such uses through a development agreement process. And that particular policy is policy 4-29 of the municipal planning strategy. So as with all development agreements, the municipal planning strategy also establishes a number of criteria that council needs to take into consideration when evaluating development agreement proposals. And those items are included under policy 6-21 of the planning strategy, and this criteria is also included within the staff report. So some particular considerations for this proposal, as I've indicated, there are 13 parcels of Crown-owned land. These lands are currently woodland. The proponent, as Mayor Norman has indicated, intends to lease portions of the subject properties to facilitate this wind energy development project. And an order of council was issued on November 29th, 2023 by the province to enter into that lease agreement. The distance of the closest wind turbine generator to a dwelling is 970 meters, so it's almost a kilometer to the closest dwelling. And this is actually a woods camp as opposed to a full-time residential dwelling. So All other dwellings would be a greater distance from the proposed wind turbine generators. The proponent has established a project website at merseywind.ca, whereby they outline all the proposal, what the project is going to look like, and all pertinent details to that. Access to the site is off of River Road in Milton and will utilize existing logging and Nova Scotia Power Service roads to facilitate the development. As required under our policy, the applicant is required to hold a separate public information session to outline the project and give the public the opportunity to make comment. The applicant actually held 2 public information sessions, one back on March 25th of 2022 and one on August 10th of 2022. There were over 50 people in attendance at these meetings. They also held in February of 2023 a public meeting with local Indigenous community, which saw over 40 people in attendance. As part of any large-scale wind turbine project, the province requires a full environmental assessment be conducted as to how the project would impact the local environment. That study was completed through Strum Consulting, and the report was submitted to the Department of Environment and Climate Change and received approval from the department on March 27th of 2023. The proponent also has permission from NAV Canada, where they have no objections to the project. So the typical lifespan of a wind turbine generator is approximately 30 years. And as part of the development agreement process, we would require inclusion of a clause or clauses within the development agreement that deals with how the developers would decommission the wind turbine generators and essentially return the area to its natural state. So we would include a decommissioning conditions within the development agreement itself. So 2 potential options. One is to maintain status quo, thereby denying the development agreement request, or 2 would be to enter into a development agreement to allow for the wind turbine project on the 13 parcels of Crown-owned land. So in looking at the proposal, staff are of the opinion that between the lease agreement and the terms of the environmental assessment that the applicant needs to comply with, that sufficient terms can be incorporated within the development agreement to mitigate potential issues with the surrounding community and are in support. Planning Advisory Committee also met and discussed the application and are also in support of the proposal.
Thank you, Director McLeod. And so also within your package is a draft of what that development agreement would look like once they lease the land if this moves ahead. Questions or comments to Director McLeod? No questions, comments? Deputy Mayor Fancy.
Yeah, so when we give the agreement to go forward, that means that once the lands come back into possession, I guess, is it that it just automatically happens? Is that what? So how does that transpire?
As far as the process for development agreement, Deputy Mayor Fancy, is that what you're? Yeah, I guess we've discussed this with our solicitor, and he's comfortable with, I guess, going through the process to actually enter into the development agreement, but we just wouldn't sign the development agreement until the full formal lease was in place with the province. So we can go through the process, so they're not actually starting from scratch once the lease agreement is put in place by the province. So.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, we sat with the Planning Advisory Committee. We sat through the presentation by Roswell on this, and they seem to be pretty responsive to the community. They set up an advisory committee with Indigenous community And during their consultation, they moved a couple of the wind turbines from areas that could potentially have been culturally sensitive near waterways. So it seems like they're doing all the right things, and you know, it doesn't affect our airport. It doesn't affect the land. They're not putting new roads in. They're using old logging roads that were back there. They'll have to upgrade them, but you know, they're not going to be tearing up wetlands for any of that. So, and this is a unique process where it's it's renewable to retail. So they're not selling power to Nova Scotia Power to sell. They're going to be selling directly to retail vendors. So which is one of the first projects of its type in Nova Scotia, which is quite exciting for me.
Any other comments, Councillor Amaro?
I'm just wondering, how does the development agreement work with leased Crown land? I know with an owner, it stays with the owner, but how does it work with Crown property?
I guess with the formal lease that the province enters into with the proponent, that they're now acting on behalf of the owner. And you're right, the development agreement does become a burden and registered against the title of the property, but the lease agreement is included actually as an appendice to the development agreement. So and it's contingent upon that lease being in effect. So so as long as that they have that formal lease with the province, that it's a valid development agreement with the applicant.
So what would happen when this lease expires?
When the lease expires, and at the end of, I guess, the term of the that's when the decommissioning plan would come into place. If there's no longer a lease agreement that the province has with Roswell, then the generators would need to be removed, and that's the decommissioning plan. So they would remove the turbines from the sites.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, as far as the
Vicky, your thing went off.
I'm just wondering, as far as the development agreement, will that still be in place after the lease expires, though?
No, if there's no wind turbine generators, if the lease expires and they decommission the sites, then we would discharge the development agreement.
Deputy Mayor Fancy.
Okay, the other question I have to ask, and I didn't see it in there anywhere, is there a responsibility of them, which with the River Road is in terrible shape. I mean, everybody knows that. It's is there any responsibility on their behalf, especially with them bringing all the equipment and everything, to be able to bring that road up to a standard?
The River Road is a provincially owned and maintained public road, so like anybody else, they would have the ability to utilize that. And obviously during the term of construction is when you're going to see the majority of traffic. Once the wind farm is up and running, there'll be very little traffic you're going to see through that. So to my knowledge, it would be, I guess, the province would, if they were damaging the road or things like that, that would be up to the provincial Department of Transportation to.
CEO Cody.
Well, this is fun now. It's a sport. Just to the question, I believe when they were doing a presentation, or maybe later when I talked to them, they did talk about some upgrades to roads, but I think those were the woods roads and not the main roads. Just that's as far as they talked about road upgrades. So just wanted to share that.
Councillor Brown.
I think during the presentation they mentioned the first bridge going up the River Road, that there would be some widening of the road there to get the turbines through. But I don't think they actually go very far up the river road before they turn off onto the Woods Road, so they're not using all of the river road. And I think they have to upgrade the base of what they do use to hold the weight of the loads they're taking in.
Any other comments? If not, I'm going to ask the question, call for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. 7.9, memorial bench placement came from past discussion, and there is a recommendation within the package. Councillor Charlton.
I move that Council of Region of Queens Municipality approve the acceptance of the memorial bench subject to the donor having it installed at Tupper Park in a location acceptable to staff.
And that's seconded by Deputy Mayor Fancy. Are there any questions or comments respecting this motion? For those who do not have the agenda in front of them, it's a request for a memorial bench from the family of Faye Dion, and the site location is Tupper Park. Staff will work with the family to determine the location. The family pays for the installation and the bench, and once it is installed, then it becomes the responsibility of the Region of Queens. And on that note, I am going to call for the question. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. CCTV Systems Place, Queens Place, a marriage center, 8.1 discussion. Now, to CEO Jodry, how do you foresee this, where this does come with a recommendation that we note that we've received the report? As CAO, do you see this as before discussion, or that we make that motion that we've received the report prior to discussion?
Your meeting, you can do it how you want, but my experience, my advice is motions are made first, and the discussion is about the motion or the action or the content provided. You don't have to do it that way, but that is, from what I've seen, the normal process.
So I'm just going to do not a council. So you wish to, what is your thought? Because this is a new process for us. Do you wish to make a recommendation where you say you've received the report, and that's all it says is that we've received the report? Do you want to do that before we review the report, or do you want to do it later? Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I'm in favor of reading the recommendation beforehand. That way we've actually received the report before we discuss it. So it almost makes sense to receive it before we can have a discussion.
Is that okay with everyone else? Anyone opposed to that? One is opposed, but anyway, so for now, and I've told CEO Jodry that it would be good for him to gather council together and in a future date and go over how the agenda works and items like this. So I will ask for the recommendation that's in the package. Councillor Brown?
I guess since I spoke out for it, I'll read it. I recommend that council receive the CCTV system Queens Place AmeriCenter for information.
Seconded by Councillor Romero.
Point of order. If we're going to recommend it, why wasn't it in the recommendations? I have a problem with this because it's in discussions. I can see putting a motion there that you want this motion. Like, are we going to vote on it today? Or are we going to vote on it the next meeting? I'm really lost on this.
And they were my questions as well. Councillor Charlton.
These mics are acting up today. I don't really understand, I guess, what the issue is, because it's just for information purposes. And so I don't understand why we would have to make a motion for it to go to a recommendation at the next meeting, where then you're just accepting it for information purposes. I think our agenda process obviously needs improvement. I think that's what our CAO is trying to do. But in previous discussions, we've discussed things and just, by a show of hands, directed our former CAO to, do something, and it wasn't necessarily a formal motion. It was just a head nod. So I think that we shouldn't get into the weeds with this.
And Councillor Muse, you may recall at past meetings, we have made recommendations with a show of hands, a seconder and a mover, that we move something on to the next meeting. So these are simply, and the format that this agenda has been changed to a few years ago, where recommendations and then discussion. It was never moved. It was never approved. There's no records that this is how our agenda works now. We did it just sort of in a light way without really changing our rules of order with our particular book and things. So where they are simply motions saying we've received reports, there's nothing substantive. It doesn't say we've received the CCTV report and we wish to direct staff to go and purchase it anyway, regardless of the cost. It's just a motion that states we've received the report. So as chair, I'm going to rule this in order, and I'm going to move on with the discussion, and not a discussion on the system, but a discussion on 8.1. So the discussion is now on 8.1, the report that is before us. So, Ms. Vino, would you just give a highlights of the report for viewers who do not have the agenda? Thank you.
At the August 8th council meeting, staff were directed to investigate the cost of a CCTV system, closed caption television system, for Queen's Place Amera Center that would include the skate park and the splash pad outside of the Amera Center. I believe there had been some incidents of vandalism that council was concerned about at the time. A cost of $20,000 had already been included in the 23-24 budget for a new camera system for Queen's Place Amera Center itself, since the current system no longer meets the operational needs of the facility. Staff prepared an RFP that was issued on October 4th, 2023. 2 responses were received and circulated to staff for their review. It was determined that there was a lack of available power sources around the skate park or splash pad that would be necessary to install either of the systems as submitted. Staff would like to reject both RFPs as submitted and issue a quotation by invitation for a smaller system that would replace the current system at Queen's Place Amera Center. This would ensure that the current system at Queen's Place Amera Center get replaced in this budget year, hopefully, and give facility staff time to assess options and costs for power delivery for the skate park and splash pad area that would enable CCTV coverage in that area in the future. When the quotation by invitation for the new Queen's Place system is written, requests for external cameras on Queen's Place Amera Center that would provide distant coverage of the skate park and splash pad area will be included in the scope of work as an additional item with separate pricing. Any budget impacts would depend on pricing for the Queen's Place Amera Center system, excluding the skate park and splash pad. The 2023 budget includes $20,000 for this system. I would just like to remind council that there was going to be a transfer from the IT and computer equipment reserve of $20,000 to cover that operating expense. So should we not secure that system by the end of March, that transfer will just not take place. So it really wouldn't affect our budget either way. If we have to move this to next budget year, we're still going to have the money in the reserve to cover it.
So that is the discussion. That basically staff is advising they too costly, it's too unknown costs. They have no idea what to put power poles and things for the exterior for our new request. But there is $20,000 there, and they would like to move ahead on the cameras, the replacement camera system for Queen's Place, Amera Center. Hopefully get get it out and issued prior to March, or things just move ahead. So, or go ahead in the next year. So that's where we are. That's your information regarding cameras for the exterior parts of Queen's Place. So, questions to Ms. Fino? Councillor Romero?
So can I ask maybe the engineer what would be involved to get power over there for these cameras?
I apologize. I caught some of the questions. So you're curious about running power from Queen's Place or wherever it would be to the play park, skate park. A lot, I guess, to put it briefly. Right now, there's power provided to the skate park by way of an underground conduit that runs from the Best Western side of Queen's Place Drive, skirting the land back to where the gazebo is. The skate park, or the play park, has an underground line that runs from behind Ground Search and Rescue Building through the woods up to that facility. Neither one of them were intended to provide more than 60 amp. That was the constraint at the time, and that was it was difficult to achieve even that. So they are limited to that level of power. Providing any additional would not enable the operation of the play park or any events at the skate park. So the skate park, maybe it's one or the other. There's no way to bridge the two of them. The lights that exist in the Queen's Place parking lots are time clocked off of the Queen's Place facility itself. So you can provide power to the posts all the time, but it's not 110 volts and they're only on at night, or the lights are on all day. Short of that would be a matter of trenching in another power line to supply power at different areas around the parking lot.
And hence was the recommendation, was the note in the report that be sourced out and figured out what it costs. It sounds like it's the installation of power poles and things. And we know with only a $20,000 budget to replace cameras, that $20,000 is not even going to come close to if we have to have power installed. So that's how I read this. That we need to figure out how to get that power sourced. Other comments? Councillor Charlton?
So under communications, it says the RFP status will be updated on the provincial procurement site once a formal recommendation has been adopted by council. I recently recall, unless I'm misunderstanding, wasn't there a motion for us to reject an RFP? Was that something we don't actually have to do? I'm just wondering because it notes that staff would like to reject the RFP. Are we expecting a recommendation to come back about that, or will we just see a new recommendation for the RFP that's being accepted?
CEO Dozier, because you are correct, we did have a motion rejecting RFPs. So CEO Dozier?
Yeah, the great question. So I think we got into this actually talking about policy and procedure last night at the Audit Internal Control Committee. And I think we need to bring back some revised policies around that. So what I expressed in the meeting is what a normal practice would be is if something's within the budget, if something is within the budget and not over budget, then staff should just be awarding the tenders or contract. If something is over budget, now, this is all subject to whatever council ultimately agrees. I'm just telling you sort of what I've seen as a normal practice. If something is over budget, over the planned budget, then you would bring that back to council and say, okay, here's our scope, it hasn't changed, but the amount we thought we'd be spending is more. So that would also come back to council. And then for things that aren't budgeted, that would also come back for council. But it would be unusual, in my experience, for council to be directing staff to reject proposals. That's sort of like generally a staff decision unless it's over the budget. And if it's over the budget, then yes, that would make sense. So, sorry, I know that sounds more confusing than I intended it to be, but okay.
Councillor Brown?
I guess my concern with that is that we had a motion directing staff to look at cameras for both the Queen's Place Amera Center and the splash pad. So if they're changing what the RFP is going to look for, that would almost, to me, require a motion of council to rescind our previous motion. Because we're changing the intent of what we instructed staff to do.
Yeah, so I think that's what this report is saying. Through you, Mayor. So I think what this report is saying is we sort of took a stab at it. You know, we didn't get numbers back. And so all we're saying here is this is where this particular topic stands. Our next step is to run a proposal and have these almost as two separate pieces. The doing the cameras in the Queen's Place and the doing the cameras sort of for the splash pad, and for us to bring those numbers back. If the number to do both of those is within the existing budget that we have, then we'll just go ahead and award the contract. But if the number we get back to do both is more than the budget, we'll absolutely bring it back to council.
That's not what I read in the report.
That's
I read in the report that we're going to take the 20,000 and get the cameras, get the new system for Queen's Place, and then through a reissuance of an RFP. And however, in that, we will ask for a sideline of what's it cost to do inside, and then as a sideline for exteriors fixed to view that way. That's how
I'm sorry, Mayor, you're absolutely right. I made a
that's
mistake. Yep.
okay. That's what this report is saying.
Apologies. Yep.
So, right, that we're going to spend, if we can, the 20,000 to do the new camera system inside Queen's Place, because that was the original plan, and at the same time also say to the company, oh, by the way, what's the cost to do those exterior cameras, distant, so that by the time we get to summer season or spring, then we may have those numbers by budget, but the 20,000 could be, we can either move forward, and this is what staff's requesting, that we put the inside cameras in under the 20,000, which is budgeted for that, and then seek further report on what it's going to cost to get cameras on that outside, because 20,000 is not going to do it. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, so the $20,000 is the initial scope that was within budget for cameras at Queen's Place. That is something that council has already approved. Then council changed the scope of the project to include the skate park and the splash pad. What staff found out was that is prohibitive in cost because there's no power sources that will allow us to do that right now at the skate park or the splash pad. So just to clarify, I will put out a request for a quote for a request invitation to quote, because the price of the system will be smaller, so I won't have to go through the RFP process to get the smaller system inside Queen's Place. Then I will ask for those quotes to include the inclusion of distant cameras that will not provide the quality of pictures that council was looking for, but they will provide a distant picture of those areas only to see how much they would cost. They will not be in the budget, so I will bring those back to council at the time. And I also would like to know from council if they wish staff to dedicate time to quantify the cost of putting that power in the splash park and the skate park area, to take staff resources to find out how much that is going to cost, so that we know, yes, you do. I don't want anyone to have to go through all that to find out, no, you didn't. It was fine. We could just use the distant cameras. So that's really what is that clear?
So do we want to do what's suggested? Get the camera replacements, get the pricing for the distant cameras, And then once the distance cameras are there, then determine, do you really need the super duper ones that are going to require extra costs? Councillor Muse.
So I thought when we brought this up about the cameras, we was gonna put them on the America Center, pointed at the skate park and the splash pad. So that's not what's happening now? We can't get cameras that are good enough to do that?
The RFP that we put out, it was my understanding and other staff's understanding that council wanted cameras in the area of the splash park and the skate pad that would allow identification of anybody in the area who was committing vandalism. And distant cameras from Queen's Place was not going to be able to deliver that kind of clarity. So it may have been discussed initially that way, but to your point, Councillor Muse, that's kind of where I'm asking to go back to now. Let's get the camera system in Queen's Place replaced. Let's ask for them to do those distance cameras to see what kind of quality we can get from those. I'll bring that back to council because that's not in the original scope of the budgeted item. And then council can decide, yes, that's good enough, or no, it's not. We'd like staff to go back and find out how much it's going to cost us to get actual power in those two areas so we can get actual surveillance cameras in those two areas.
Any other points? Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Yes, so, if we do this one project, which is what Councillor Muse is talking about, and what you are explaining here fully, which is quite understandable, is that without bothering any power sources or such as we change it over to Queen's Place with a distance focus, which will give us some kind of security at this particular time, that gives us something to start from, and then be able to see how clear it is and how much if this will be workable for us. So with that, I'm in agreement with that.
Councillor Charlton?
I'm just trying to go back and find if there was a clear motion because it's not in this package, and I'm just wondering if anyone else noticed that because so far I've only gotten to the minutes of August 8th, but at the end it says that councilors agreed to staff investigating and bringing a recommendation back at the next council meeting on the cost and time frame to have cameras installed on the exterior of Queen's Place and Mayor Center. So that was August 8th. I'm just asking the question if anyone has that. If not, I'll need a minute.
I believe that's where it ended. That we asked staff to come back and investigate, and they are coming back with what they've found out. I do not recall them coming back with numbers or anything else. I think when that motion was made and they have done their investigation, they did the work, they put out the RFPs, and there's been, this is the result.
I would just like to say to council, I do apologize for the lag between that original meeting in August. As you know, it was a summer and staff resources were sparse. Other directors were very, very, I don't even know the word to use. We were busy.
Being
So,
CAOs.
I didn't get the RFP itself out till October, and then we had to get staff to review it, and then I had to discuss with the director of engineering. He had to explain to me why there was no power, because being an accountant, not an engineer, I was like, why is there power poles there but no power? You need to explain that to me. So all of these things kind of took time. So that's why there was such a significant delay in getting this back.
Councillor.
Sorry, no, I haven't found further. I just wanted to clarify that in no way was my comment directed at that. I was just curious where there was no motion in the package, and Councillor Brown raised the point about is this changing the intent of the motion? I just wanted to see if we were creating another mess we'd have to fix at the next meeting. So please, if that's how I came off, I apologize.
Thank you for staying on top of that. I appreciate you, Councillor Charlton. I think there's a couple of missteps and fumblings here on procedure, and that's okay. We'll fix it for next time. I think ultimately what this boils down to is the 20,000 is not enough to do the cameras inside and the cameras outside. So that's really the point of this report. And so the question for council at this point is, do you want us to proceed with replacing the cameras inside and figure out what the cost is for the outside ones and bring that back? Or do you want us to just get an actual price for all of it before doing anything? Or, well, those are really the two primary options. Yeah. So it's really Councillor Muse did actually put his
What's going on? The green isn't working anymore.
Councillor,
Normally when we have our mic on, person speaking. The first person speaking has it red. The person who hits it again, it turns green and flashes. That's not happening. It's automatically cutting out the person who's speaking. So if we're all hitting our buttons, it's cutting the mics out for the people that are already speaking, and I just wanted to point that out.
good observation. So, Councillor Muse, I believe you were identified.
So I'm really lost on the recommendation. Even though I think it's out of order, but that's a side point. So that the council receives the seat, that has nothing to do with what we're asking here. We're saying that we should put the cameras in the Mayor's Center and then investigate the outside ones. That's what I'm getting at. What does that have to do with the recommendation?
I think the word report was left out of there, that the council received the CCTV system Queen's Place and Mayor's Center report for information, because we're not receiving any CCTV system. We're basically receiving the report. And the report is $20,000 will do you inside. $20,000 will probably get you the distance cameras. That's what this is saying. If you want to price power poles and other stuff, then that's going to be a separate discussion. But $20,000 will get you distance cameras and the inside cameras, hopefully.
No, I don't.
So what I see in front of us are three things: the $20,000, which is within scope. As staff, I'm okay with doing that because you've already approved that in the budget. I'm going to ask in the quotes for them to add distance cameras, which will be above the scope of what council approved. That's what I'm going to do if it's okay with council. I'm going to come back because it's unbudgeted and tell you how much those distance cameras are going to cost and what kind of resolution they're going to get you. I may even have photographs. You never know. And so at that point in time, council can decide if that is good enough or if they wish to have clear video surveillance of that area. Because the staff time and resources it is going to take to source the cost to have that, to plan it all out, is significant. And I don't want to have to incur those staffing costs if it's not necessary. Like, I would like to try and get council the information they need based on what our current power infrastructure first, before we go down the road of involving engineering at Public Works resources with designing new access on how to get power in those areas. So there really is two things. It's an awareness that we couldn't get you what you wanted. Is it okay if I come back to you with an additional cost for the distance cameras, because I can already go out with the request for pricing on the Queen's Place Center cameras. I'm good there. But I'd like your permission to be able to ask them to supply distance cameras quotes and then come back to you with that. And at that time, I'll ask for a decision on whether you want further staff resources taken up with designing how, if we need it, how to get power to the splash pad and the skate park. Does that make sense?
How do we sit with that one? And this is what makes CAO Jodrey nervous, because I've explained to him this is how we've worked in the past. We have these discussions and then we sort of just come to consensus, but he comes from a history of motions. And then it's very difficult to be suddenly making motions that aren't before us and the wording and everything else. So generally in the past, CAO Jodrey, I simply look around and say, is there anyone who really objects to what Director Vino has proposed? Are you all right? And if there's not a big kerfuffle, because we're not really spending money, then she proceeds along, and it's been working fairly good. However, yeah. Yes. Councilor Romero?
Yes, please do as you have said.
Councilor Brown?
I was just going to say, since we already have a motion on the floor that stated that, I'm good with going back to the original motion and following along through it, and having Director Vino come back if there's any excess costs above budget.
And we did make the motion that we're receiving the CCTV system, and it should have been the word report, Queen's Place Mayor Center report. So I'm going to call for the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? So I think we had 2 non-hands. Financial review quarter 3, and going forward, I think you will see when we do things like this, there will also be a recommendation that says that we've received the report, but not yet. However, like I said, we create our agenda and we create the rules around which it works. So for now, the financial review quarter 3, and just a question to Ms. Vino. So what was the cutoff date for the end of quarter 3? December 31st. So the numbers before you and the information you've seen is relevant to December 31st, and we are now currently in our last quarter. But these numbers all are up to December 31st. So please go ahead.
So council should have 2 documents. They should have the written report, and then they should have the accompanying non-consolidated statement of operations. So I will just follow along with my written report. And just a note, this report was reviewed last night by the Audit and Internal Control Committee, and they didn't have any concerns. I just wanted to pass that along. So Section 1 taxes, our tax sale recovery is below budget because we have a tax sale by tender in February, and I think that closes today or tomorrow. More properties than anticipated have title issues that require legal survey work before they can be taken to tax sale. Deed transfer tax was set at $720,000 for the year, and as of December 31st, 2023, we've received $957,000. Quarter 4 is typically a slower one for real estate sales. Year-end projection for deed transfer tax is $1.2 million, which is 58% above budget. Audit and Internal Control Committee will be reviewing the deed transfer tax budget for 22-25. They did that at last night's meeting, and we decided that we were going to use an average of the last 5 years. And all of the committee members, we had an animated discussion on whether we should be conservative or not, and some other suggestions were discussed that I'll be bringing up during the budget time about any overages in deed transfer tax and how we use those overages and record them in the future. Nova Scotia Power's corporation taxes are higher than budget, and that is something that we have no control over. They just send us a check and we say thank you very much. Grants in lieu of taxes. At this point, those grants in lieu for Crown Timberlands have all been received, but they had not as of December 31st. Sales of services, we had $30,000 budgeted for metal sales, but prices are low, so we're going to hold those until fiscal 2024 to sell them. Due to the temporary shutdown of the MRF operations, less revenue from recycling commodities was received. The MRF is currently back in operation with full staffing in place. Section 5, other revenue from owned sources. Our return on investments have exceeded budget because there was slower than budgeted decrease in interest rates, and we're still managing the GICs. Just for council knowledge and awareness, we have all the operating cash that was placed in GICs has now been cashed. So you will see a reduction in the interest rate because we don't have any GICs left. We're down to our operating cash. Interest is higher on overdue accounts, reflecting a slowing of payments for the 23-24 tax year as compared to 22-23. Recreational program revenue shows as under. However, there is revenue expected in January, and that has been received that will compensate for this. And included in miscellaneous revenue is an unsightly claim moved from being posted as an expense to forming a lien on the property that's no longer being expensed to the region, but to the assessed owner. Also included is Efficiency Nova Scotia funding for Queen's Place, Floyd Pop requests, and copier revenue from the library. I'm now in section 6, unconditional transfers from the government. The big one is municipal payment grants, and that payment was received in January. It just wasn't in by the end of December when these statements were prepared. Section 7 is conditional transfers. Majority of this funding comes in at the end of the year and may be affected by the MRF being non-operational for a period of time. Section 8 transfers. These are other transfers. These are revenue that we bring in from the reserve. So when you as council pass the budget and say we're going to fund that from reserves, i.e. the donation to the Queens Neighborhood Housing Corporation, that's where I bring the money in. So I write the check. That's in section 16, and then I bring the revenue in from the reserve in section 8. You'll see that, just for an awareness thing, you'll see that the actual is 2.8 million. That's because I had to bring in revenue for the sale of the Queen's Place land. That was $968,000. It was also on last quarter's report, and also we moved deferred revenue from the substantial growth fund that we received at the end of March of last year. We applied that to the Waterloo project as was approved by council in the budget process last year. So the revenue had to show, I have to show all the revenue. Everything comes through the operating house, remember? So everything has to go through operating. So if I spend it from operating, I have to bring in the revenue to cover it through operating. So that's why it looks like it's way over budget. Those two things are just part of the budget, but not part. Do you know what I mean? Okay, is there any questions on revenues? Let's move on. Expenditures. General Government Services, Section 9. The only thing we have of note, obviously, we have some administration staffing vacancies. We still have a couple of those. We had less celebratory occasions, i.e. the Jubilee Medal, and we spent more money the previous year on other things. That's why the other council is below budget. We had a budgeted $2,000 for courses for counselors that has not also been spent. So, you have till the end of March, so have a look. Reduced taxes are low income tax exemption. Media promotion has been improved for the last push for awareness to educate more residents about this rebate. And our manager of finance has reported to me that yes, they have had some uptake on that. So that's a good thing because we want people to use it. Budgeted renovations under common services for the municipal building, which we're in right now, has not been done. So it is under budget. Other government general services, conventions, there were no attendees of the SCM conference this year. That was included in the budget. Section 10, protective services. The fire hall in Liverpool is significantly over budget because we had a problem with a burst pipe that caused an insurance claim. The radiators needed to be replaced, so the budget was $53,500 and year to date is $92,700. That cost includes the $10,000 insurance deductible. Radiator installation went over because all the piping had to be rerouted and the water main issue rerouted. That was contributing to the remainder of the overage. Section 11, transportation services. Gas and diesel are running under budget. If you remember when we did the budget last year, we thought gas prices were out of control. They have stabilized now, so that is a good thing, even with the inclusion of the carbon tax. So the price increases were not as much as we budgeted for, and at the time, the lack of snow clearing has meant less consumption for plows, and that was a bit of a chuckle last night because I guess I jinxed everybody there. Renovation costs for the Works Garage are at $102,000, budgeted at $73,000. Again, I brought that up on the last quarterly report. The scope of that project has not changed, just the cost associated with it has, which has caused it to go over budget. Investment in staff training is over budget, which reflects implementation of identified opportunities to provide up-to-date OHS training for staff. Roads and Streets is under budget because design study for the bridge has not happened. That has not taken place this year. Section 12, Environmental Health. Sewage collection, treatment, and disposal administration is insurance and education. Sewer collection systems, lift station cleaning of $19,000 and connection costs of over $15,000 for one property have caused those things to go over. We discussed that last night, and I believe Director Grant has already talked to council about adjusting that when we bring a new sewer bylaw, those connection fees. Heat pumps for lagoon building costs us $7,000. Recycling costs are down due to staff shortages and no overtime requirements due to the temporary shutdown of the MRF facility. And that brings us to section 14. Environmental planning and zoning administration are under budget due to staffing vacancies. We are currently advertising for 2 positions in this department. Other accessibility projects are still being developed, therefore there's been a minimal funds spent of a $100,000 budget. Tourism, marketing, and promotion, $3,000 spent to date of the $27,100 budget. Economic development is under budget as the $1 million HVAC project for the Liverpool Business Development Center is in its early stages. So all the contracts and the commitments have been made. That project is going to happen. It's just going to be moved. We'll move whatever funding we have to do in the capital investment plan on to next year. And as you remember, we were funding partial from the reserve that council had set up. Then we were going to use some of the surplus, and then we were going to borrow the rest. So right now, what's been spent has come from the reserve. I think there's $36,000 left in the reserve, and then we'll move to using the operating surplus to budget it, and then a last-ditch effort will be to borrow money, because we don't want to borrow money unless we have to. Section 15, swimming pools are over budget. Some repair costs for the Milton Pool that council approved, and the chemical costs for both pool billings were received and recorded in this quarter. And Astor Theater, there was a minimal money was spent of the $20,000 budget to the end of the quarter in terms of work on that building. I think that is a direct result of staffing limitations and resources that the Engineering and Public Works is able to do. Section 15, fiscal services. Again, this is the counterpart to Section 8. This is where we take money out of operating and put it into the reserves. And there were a lot of budgeted transfers that are done every quarter. And I like to break this out because it is a very big number. And if you look on the next page, you'll see those things are all broken out. A lot of those things are budgeted. You'll see there's your $939,425 long-term care land sale. That's the cost to offset the revenue in Section 8. There's our $763,008 for Waterloo. That offsets the revenue that was brought in Section 8. Hillsview Acres now has a new revenue line so that all the funding that actually comes on behalf of residents is on one line. So everything that you see on the residential care line is actual resident care. What happens, the other funding would be if there is an approved bump in wages for our staff. Government funds it, so our wage budget will look over, but you'll see the revenue for that under other funding sources, the same as the capital projects. You'll see the building maintenance, it looks way over, but it's not, because we actually got money from the government to do those funding projects, and it's under other funding sources. We actually completed, and I think I talked to council about this before, we've completed the washroom renovation, the tub room renovation, and exterior doors, and they're going to hopefully get the flooring done in the next couple of weeks, and it looks amazing up there. So if any of you are in the neighborhood, please stop by. I'm sure Audrey, and we have a new recreation director, Ashley Sherman, who's lovely, and she's fitting in really great up there. And that brings us to the utility. Water treatment plant expenses are considerably higher than budget. The plant has required significant investment this year. Chemical cost increases of 10% were budgeted, but the actual cost is already 30% over as of January 25th. Process equipment was budgeted at $30,000 and $300,000 has been spent as of January 25th. The insurance claim settlement for the lightning strike is currently being negotiated by staff. A recovery of approximately $82,000 is anticipated and will be recorded as revenue in January. Administration is over budget due to the advertising expense incurred because of the boil water advisory. I can advise council that we received all but one item that was claimed. I pushed back a little bit at the insurance company and they did reimburse us for the $13,000 of advertising expenses. So I believe Director Grant got everything he requested except for one small pump, which was a couple of $1,000s, and then we had to pay our $10,000 deductible. So at the end of the day, that claim is now finalized, but we are still dealing with some of the fallout from the lightning strike. But the claim portion itself is done. Does council have any questions?
Questions, comments? Another, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, this second time in 2 days that I've heard this report, so it's, as Director Vino said, you gotta love numbers to do this. But I really appreciate the effort that goes into keeping us up to date, and every quarter we know where we stand and where the money's being spent. And the Audit and Internal Control Committee last night, we had a lot of discussions on how to fine tune our budgeting process to make it even more accurate in the future, so that the residents of Queens County are getting the best bang for their buck that we can possibly give them.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Muse?
On revenue, we budgeted that we were going to take in taxes $13,470,000, but in actual we brought in $14,800,000. Can you explain to me why it was so much, 10% more?
So if you look down at the bottom section, Councilor Muse, conditional transfers, you're looking at the bottom two numbers, right? 13,471.
Yes.
14,835.
Yes.
So those expenses are quarterly. So we haven't paid all of that appropriation to the school board yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I wish. Sorry.
Okay.
250 or 60,000 a month.
But that's still, there's quite a bit of difference here. That's still $1 million difference. Oops.
If we look at on a line by line basis, so ignore the bottom part, which is the costs that come directly off the taxes, right? So ignore those. So we look at the first line, so residential. So we budgeted 10.3, we got 10.2. Commercial, we budgeted 10.7, and we got 1.7, we got 1.7. If you look at all the different lines, the only line that's really off, we have less taxation coming in for the environmental health services. And then we have more for the deed transfer tax. But everything else is roughly where it should be. Yeah.
Any other questions? I'll move on to the council implementation report. Pardon? I know, but I just want to move through this as quickly as we can. It's a short one. Council implementation report 8.3. Are there any matters? I know there's one matter, and maybe to Director McLeod. That last item that has been here since December 12th, no, check further. October 22nd, 2019. The negotiations with Mogan Holdings Limited and to CEO Jodry. Maybe we just either make a motion to cease whatever. I mean, it's 5 years.
And
I know.
And essentially, it's with the property owner to provide the deed, and it's been, yeah. So we've been working to try to get that for quite some time. But,
5 years. I just find that carrying something like this forward for 5 years, either the property owner wants to do it, he doesn't. So maybe I don't know. Maybe if other members of council feel that we should be getting rid of this, just let me know and we can bring it back and just get rid of that motion to do those lots or take over that parking. Clear that up. That's it. That's my only comment on that. Does anyone else have any comment on the council implementation report? And if I don't hear from anyone, then we'll just leave this here. The next council that come in October 24 can see this from 2019. That's it. We had scheduled that we were going to break at 12 o'clock for half an hour. And then we will resume as closely to 12:30 as we can. So I will recess the meeting. Everyone grab a quick lunch. And then we'll be back as quick as we can. And we're having lunch in. I assume it's here. It is 12:33 and we are returned after a short recess. And we are at, so North Queens active living request. I put this on here because CEO Jodry wanted us to give direction on whether or not we wanted to consider their request as part of our budget deliberation. And as we'll note, the request is a little different this year. Their request is for long-term permanent funding or long-term funding. So I guess we're not making a decision now, but we are making a decision of whether or not we want staff to create a report for budget respecting long-term funding or just funding. So that's why it's here for discussion.
I could maybe just clarify. So no, this was more about, sorry, I think we're still tweaking our process, but so there was a presentation by an outside group asking council for money. And so what the mayor and I were discussing was, I said to her, but if they present, I don't know what council wants. Does council want to consider that part of the budget? Or so I was just looking for some direction from council as to what you want to do with the ask. Not that you would make the decision today, but you want to discuss it at your next agenda. You want to forward the matter to the budget review, whatever. I just need some direction from council about what you want me to do with that request. Yeah.
Because in past years, as you recall, when groups like that came for requests, their requests just went in the budget automatically, and then we decided whether or not we were going to do it. So this is why it's here. Councilor Brown?
Yeah, I don't have any problem putting it in the budget request. And I know last night at the excuse me, in the audit and internal control meeting, there was a lot of discussion around making commitments for future councils and whether that actually falls within our jurisdiction under the MGA to make a commitment for somebody else to follow through on. So I would be more happy with just looking at a single year in the budget process this year.
You've been heard. Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Yes, I go along with Councillor Brown in the idea that this has been an ongoing ongoing ask for the last 3 years, and I think it's very, very much for us to consider for another year, but to make it into something long term, whether us not discussing greenfield or other options that could go along with it. I think we'd want to have a more of a extensive discussion, and maybe that's for the next council.
Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. I respectfully disagree on the note that these not-for-profit groups can't plan long-term without any kind of long-term planning. And we're often asked by people in the more rural areas of Queens County, you know, what do we get for our taxes and things like that. And I think the value that this has added to North Queens and what it's creating for the community speaks for itself. And I think that it would be a mistake for us not to support them in their ask for permanent funding. From what I understand in my experience here the last few years is that we can change that, future councils rather could change that at any time. We have an area rate for Brooklyn, for example, that with that new policy that just came through, if the next council chooses to deal with that differently with the review process, I think it was the second year of the new council, then they can do that. So I'm very much in favor of proceeding with this request in the budget for permanent funding because it will open up so many more opportunities for them. And I think to Councillor Brown's point earlier about Greenfield, they're the connecting piece, I think, to Greenfield. I don't think that it's probably fair to expect that their part-time coordinator has a capacity to also encompass Greenfield, but I think doing this and supporting them permanently is a step forward to then try to get someone in Greenfield to come in on a role. And if they can secure that person, then they could come back to us and say, hey, we have someone who can do this in Greenfield and we're looking for a little bit of funding. And as we know, councils can expend things outside of budget. So I think not supporting this would be a mistake, and I think going forward with it is a step in the right direction to also have something similar in Greenfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlton. Other viewpoints? Councillor Hawks.
This is a big benefit to the community, and I cannot see why we would ever have to go away from it. I'd like to see it go long term.
Other opinions? Councillor Romero, Councillor Brown, you've already spoken, so I'll give other people a chance. Councillor Romero?
I think it's a great initiative. I'm fully behind it. It's always been spoken that there's always things here in South Queens and not North Queens, so I think it's great to be supporting North Queens.
Just as a suggestion, there's no harm in asking staff to look at all the possibilities of long-term funding, which could even include an area rate request if the group so wished. But staff certainly could investigate how long-term funding is established. At the same time, council knowing if they don't want to go that route, they can always do the year to year. I think what the group asked is it even possible to guarantee? I know in our current budget, I believe there's $5,000 line every year that goes to Greenfield Rec. It's not debatable. It's not community investment fund. It's $5,000 automatically put in the budget every year for Greenfield Rec. So I don't know how that was established. Was it a motion of council years ago or what was it? But I know it's there. So if that's there for one organization, what are the avenues of guaranteeing or long-term funding for X number of years. I don't know, but I'd be interested to know if there is a structure or if there's ways in which the organization can apply on their own. That's just an opinion. I'm not selecting one or the other. I would like to just see the whole picture as part of budget process, knowing that there's no promises that if it's part of the process, it's going to be approved. Councillor Muse, you have yet to speak.
The recreation for Greenfield, I think that's through the recreation program. It's the same as the hang snow and everything else.
No, we community invest fund them, but they also have a single line budget item. Director Vino? Yes. Ms. Smart? Trade, yes.
You had asked where that funding for Greenfield Recreation Association is budgeted in our operational budget. Is that the question? So it's under community grants and services line, and it has been there since I took over this position. So I'm unsure where it came from, but that's where it's always been.
No, it's not debatable under community grants. It's its own separate line. They don't apply for that $5,000, correct? It's just, they assume they're going to get it. It's just straight there.
So there's usually a letter that has come. I'd have to look back at how long that's been taking place. So I don't know that they assume it's coming. I can't speak for them on that.
Deputy Mayor Fancy.
I think that was my first session of council that when that first came up, because Greenfield would keep asking for the 5,000 each year, so that went on for 3 or 4 years, and then after we said, okay, do they have to continue to ask for that 5,000 each year? And so we ended up making it a line item, so that they would get that. So because they would say, well, the other people are getting it, we're not getting it, and so we ended up making it a line item as far as my remembrance of how it all took place.
However, let's just say there's precedence in place. Privateer Days always had a line item. But for whatever reason, that line item remains, and it doesn't go through our community investment thing because they could still apply for money through community investment fund.
My understanding is that it's part of the budget process each year. When Joanne presents the budget, it is part of what's included in that line. I think if there was a change that wanted to be made at any time, I think council would have the option to do that.
So just for council's awareness, it is part of the grants line. It doesn't have, there's no line item for it. It is included, and it is something that I bring to council when the budget process takes place. We review all of the grants that are on that line as they're submitted to me through Megan. She would have had the letter of request. It's not a standing item. I've never heard that term before because it's my understanding that you as council have the discretion to agree or to authorize or not anything as part of the budget process. So you could at any time say, we're not comfortable with that. That's your discretion as council. It's nothing to do with staff. I would never ever presume to put anything in a budget as a standing item for that reason.
But what I wanted to clarify is it's not under the community investment fund. They don't have to make application and show what they're using it for. It's not under the list of grants we give out when we do the operational grants and we make those decisions and the Sarita brings the list to us. It's in the budget when you go through it. but it's not in those other pots where people compete.
That is correct. It is.
That's what I meant
it's
to
in
say.
that bucket.
Right.
Whether council wants people to report on what they spend the money on, that's just best practice. If council decides that's not important to them, that's another topic altogether. But no, they do not have to apply and meet the certain criteria like the people in the CIF do. Absolutely, that is correct.
Councillor Gidney? Mic on, please.
I'm sorry, do they request this money every year? Like, I don't understand exactly what's happened. We just give them $5,000 and they don't, we just send them a check for $5,000 every year? This is what I understand, and I don't understand this.
I'll give you an example that who's cutting me off? Senior safety grant, $5,000. Since I've been here, I received a letter the first year after we had a budget meeting, asking for it for that year because it hadn't been requested. So far this year, it has not been requested. So when you have an organization that you're giving out money, my assumption would be, and I would hope that the standard practice is, we don't cut a check unless we have a written request.
Councillor Charlton.
Thank you. I think this is identifying that there's a procedural problem. We're kind of debating this here, but how is this any different than us supporting Queens County Transit every year? I mean, they asked for an increase one year. It was either a first or second year on budget, and we increased it. But to me, if we're going to make comments about that these organizations need to send us letters if they want the funds, then we need to make that clear to these organizations. I guess another point is that anything in the budget, is debatable. So just because something is in there doesn't mean that it stays the same, whether it's the same amount or if it stays in there or what have you. So again, I would just go back to the fact that this is supporting a really rural area in Queens with a lot of people who have barriers to accessing things. They're not coming into Liverpool for soccer or Queen's Place or whatever. And I have a question in regards to the Recreation for All program. It's my understanding that for someone to receive funding for Recreation for All, it has to be used in a facility that we own. Is that still the fact? Has there been anything that's changed on that?
That is correct. It can also go towards swimming lessons. So it's things that we offer. So if we're running something.
To clarify.
Yeah, but we want to try to keep on the topic of this discussion.
Yeah, it relates. So to clarify for this is that the folks in North Queens have far less opportunities to access a Recreation for All grant than those who are in South Queens. And so that would be my argument as to why we should be considering giving them permanent support. It doesn't stop future councils from changing that, but I think it makes the most sense and supports an area that needs the support. Thank you.
And just say that staff can add whatever council wishes to the budget. It's your budget. If you wish us to include an amount of money for whatever organization in that grants and organizations line, we can do that. That's at your discretion, not ours. The caveat, I guess, is that when you're committing to funding something long term, I don't know if you as a council can do that because every single year there's a different budget with different priorities. So if you're a not-for-profit organization, are you going to be able to count on that funding? You can say, we agree today that we're going to put this in the budget for next year for X number of dollars. If council is able to commit further than one fiscal year.
CAO Dodry wishes to speak.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna just maybe try to provide some clarity around some of these topics, and totally normal. So for one reference, and I think Councillor Brown was referring to it when we were at the audit and internal control meeting yesterday, we were talking about some things, and I had said, generally, current councils are not supposed to commit future councils to things. That's a general principle. Meaning, you couldn't make a motion today to bind council on December 15th, 2024 to something, because that council could decide to do something different, to your point. But how some of this rolls out. So one, how things get in the budget and this secure funding, I want to provide some clarity around that. So sometimes what happens is councils just say, you know what, I'd like to see that in the budget. And then as the director mentioned, it just sort of shows up, and then council can sort of take it in or take it off or put it in as they so choose. Sometimes you have programs that are established that have certain criteria, and you fund the program, and the program, if people apply and they meet the criteria, you give them the money. And then the last way you would give someone money is by establishing some formal agreement between the region and the organization that's like, for example, a 5-year agreement where you would say, if you provide this service, we will give you X amount of money, which you can do and does, in theory, bind the future council, although they could always decide to terminate the agreement as such. But I just want to provide, those are the different tools and approaches on how things happen. Hopefully that's helpful.
So my question back to council is, and I guess I'm going to say it this way, is there anyone who would be opposed to having the North Queens active living request included for budget consideration? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to having it included in the budget request, but I think if we're looking at the potential for long-term, I'd like to see it potentially increased with the understanding that Greenfield is included in it. So, you know, they've said that they don't have enough funding to handle the two communities, but if we could increase the funding a small amount, then they could provide the programs in Greenfield, and it could actually be a full North Queens program.
I guess my only comment is that's not what we were requested to do. That's sort of what evolved out of it, and I wouldn't want to make any of those assumptions without that request from them. The request from them is from North Queens Living is for 17,000, I believe, to be
16,500.
16,500. I rounded it up. 16,500 to be included in the budget. So the question is, do we wish to see their request looked at as part of the budget and perhaps investigated and it could be discussed at budget time, whether or not council wanted to enter into any long-term agreements. But a long-term agreement such as Councillor Brown stated sounds good, but that requires that organization to ask that. We cannot say to them, we'll dangle the carrot, but this is what you have to do for us. So, Councillor Fancy?
Yeah, the only bad part, of course, of all these things is that most of these groups are reliant upon not just us, but other groups for where they get money. And that's why any longer term is better for the sense of saying, because they have to make an application and say, well, could we get $5,000 from here? And if they haven't got this from here, then it doesn't. So that's why we always ran into problems with all of our other groups, because it's hard to make an application when they don't know they're getting the money in the first place. So longer term makes it good. Maybe we should look at a longer term agreement. So maybe that's when it comes into that discussion.
Not an official vote, just a show of hands. How many people would be satisfied if this was included in our budget for budget considerations? 16.5 for budget. Okay, so so we can leave it at that. And see, that's how we used to end things. I know you don't like it ended that way, but I always said we have minutes and we have our recordings, and that's the way, I mean, you can reshape things, but you inherited us.
Understood. You're the mayor. You decide how the council meeting works. No problem.
Well, no, we decide as a council how we want our council meeting to work. Yeah,
All I'm doing
and
is
yeah,
supplying information to council.
right.
What you decide to do with that is up to you.
Yeah, thank you. Brooklyn Recreation. There was a recommendation that we received this report. If someone would like to make the recommendation, just the recommendation is stated. Council, there is a recommendation in here. Is anyone, Councillor Charlton?
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receive the Brooklyn Recreation Notice to Reader Reimbursement Report dated February 13th, 2024.
Seconded by Councillor Gidney. Discussion. Councillor Romero.
I'd like to make an amendment, a motion for this amendment for the recommendation for discussion. I move the Council of Region of Queens Municipality receive the Brooklyn Recreation Notice to Read a Reimbursement Report dated February 13th, 2024, and to reimburse the amount of $1,150 to Brooklyn Recreation, and to be brought back as a motion at our next council meeting on February 27th.
And this is a motion. So you don't make a motion and bring back a motion.
She's making a motion to amend the motion on the table.
That's right. But once, if the motion's amended, then the reimbursement is considered. Not.
Yeah. So what I heard, just to provide some clarity. Sorry, what I heard, just to provide some clarity, is sorry, this is more of a point of order, I guess, at this point, but you need a seconder for that. That motion, then you vote to amend the motion, right? You need a seconder. You vote on the amendment. You're voting to change the actual motion. That's all. Not saying you agree with the actual motion, but then you vote on the amendment, and then that amendment you vote on, and if that were to happen, our direction would be at the next council meeting to bring back that matter as a recommendation for council's consideration. That's how I would interpret that, just for clarity.
By Councillor Gidney. I interpreted that the motion would have been settled at this point in time. And I guess I just got the words I would have said, and at our next meeting, bring back a motion to, it's just the wordsmithing was all. But your intention is that if the amendment passes at the next meeting, there will be discussion and debate, or recommendation and debate, that the fee be reimbursed at the next meeting.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I understand that now. It just question on the amendment, and the amendment being to reimburse the amount of $1,150 to Brooklyn Rec, and to bring that back as a recommendation. So discussion on the amendment. Anyone wish to comment on the amendment? Councillor Amaro?
So I just want to give a little bit of background. These policy revisions came about from an area rate meeting and a vote that we had. We just discovered that there was a few things in the policy that need to be tweaked, and notice to reader was one of the top priorities. There wasn't a definition, I guess, there for that. So we had some discussion on that back in February, March, I believe it was. So in April, we started policy revisions after we went through this area rate meeting and the area rate vote. Eric Levy was our clerk at the time, and he started to do some revisions. and then we lost him, we lost our CAO, so it kind of got into the mix. It wasn't a priority. We had an interim CAO and then some directors as well was taken over for the CAO, so it was just more of immediate problems that had to be fixed or had to be looked at the time. So we had hoped for this to be completed by at least the end of last year, but it wasn't completed. It was only passed on our January 23rd meeting, which was our last council meeting. The notice to reader and all these specifications that had to be completed was supposed to be done by January 15th. And I guess I'm just asking for council support to Brooklyn Recreation, refunding them this amount of money, just because it's so close in the timeline from January 15th to the January 23rd meeting. They were afraid they would not get the area rate if everything wasn't completed by the 15th, so it was taken to the auditor and done. The price the auditor quoted was $1,500 plus tax, and where they were a community association, they gave it to them for $1,000 plus tax, which is $1,150. Brooklyn Recreation is doing as much as possible to try to stretch what money they do have. They've changed out the lights to LED in the Hank Snow Playground. They've changed to LED lighting at the waterfront park. They're applying for grants. They had an energy audit done of the Brooklyn Hall as well. So there's doors needs to be replaced, windows needs to be replaced, the heating all needs to be replaced. Not much has been done in that Brooklyn Hall on the inside for many, many years. So every dollar counts, and I'm just hoping that council will see this, that they're working really hard, trying to better the community of Brooklyn, and this $1,150 would go a long ways. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the amendment? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, when I saw this in the package, I initially wasn't fully in favor of it because I think it sets quite a precedent. But I think this time, really, we created the issue around making it so late that they had no choice but to do it. And on a one-time basis, I feel that I could probably support this right now, but knowing that another organization that comes forward, I may not look as favorably upon it because we didn't create an immediate situation. So I would support it because we did cause a problem by not doing this in a timely manner.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Any other comments before I call for the question on the amendment? To the amendment, Councillor Troughton.
I would just, I'm in favor with what was already mentioned. I think that if we would have had this dealt with a little bit earlier, they would have avoided this, so I also have no problems.
Any other questions? Question on the amendment, which is to reimburse the amount of Brooklyn Rec $1,150 and be brought forward as a recommendation at our next meeting. Question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? All those in favor of the motion as amended? Passed. And we are now going to have Director Grant and Garrett. There's been many discussions in the last 3.5 years over roads and streets and signs and traffic authority and sidewalks and all types of things. So this is a opportune time for council to hear a little more thoroughly on traffic authority, who has the authority over what streets and what that traffic authority means. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much and good morning. So it's still morning. Like the mayor said, we're here to provide just somewhat of a brief, I guess, introduction to the role of traffic authority in Nova Scotia and kind of how we apply that in Queens County, specifically in Liverpool. It's his fault. Oh, there we go. So a few definitions to kind of kick it off. First one being authority. So authority be a person who has the power to give orders and make decisions. Next would be highway. Highways are not specific to 100 series like you think of. They're streets, roads, sidewalks, any network of a system that transports traffic from one spot to another. And traffic are the users of highways, which include pedestrians, cyclists, as well as motor vehicles. Going to the next slide, so a brief look at some of the applicable government acts. Municipal Government Act gives council the power to create bylaws respecting health, well-being, and safety, as well as outline the appointment of a traffic authority, and defines the jurisdictions between the Provincial Traffic Authority and the Municipal Traffic Authority. Motor Vehicle Act is what outlines the powers and responsibilities of the Traffic Authority. The Engineering Profession Act is what regulates, or is our governing body, what regulates our practice as professional engineers in Nova Scotia. And the Traffic Safety Act, which was introduced in 2018, will eventually replace the current Motor Vehicle Act. The next slide, introducing, I guess, some confusion. So professionalism. So there exists levels of inconsistent application of guiding principles and practices between municipal units, which leads to some of the confusion that we see. It's a contentious discussion point regularly between us as engineers with other units and how they apply theory and practice in the real world while respecting applicable boundaries. It creates the complications under the Engineering Profession Act with our Code of Ethics and bylaws. Ultimately, we are responsible to the Minister of the Province of Nova Scotia as the Traffic Authority and by way of the Provincial Traffic Authority. Our current practice here in Queens, as it pertains to Liverpool streets, would be to abide by the responsibilities imposed under the MVA, follow the guiding principles of the Provincial Traffic Authority, and utilize resources such as Transportation Association of Canada or transportation engineers.
All right, so now a few things about Municipal Traffic Authority powers and responsibilities which are given to us as per the Motor Vehicle Act. So one of them is erecting traffic control devices such as signs, markings, and control signals. Establishing crosswalks, safety zones, which are those yellow hashed areas that you see on the roadway, traffic lanes, prohibition of left turns, right turns, U-turns, creation of one-way streets, and other things of that nature. Another one is permitting for on-highway special events such as parades and walkathons, so ensuring that those can be carried out safely within on the highway and within the street right of way. Fixing maximum rate between 50 and 80 kilometers an hour. Designating school or park areas. Designating a sidewalk or portion as a trail, because those two things are different.
And so that's just a look at the jurisdiction that we have within Liverpool specifically. It doesn't extend beyond the boundaries of the former town into Milton, where the Provincial Traffic Authority has the responsibility. Some history, Nova Scotia, Queens specific, the Motor Vehicle Act first introduced in 1907. Given some context, in 1923 cars were first required to drive on the right side of the road only. And in 1935, roads in Nova Scotia began to be hard surfaced. In 1932, the Motor Vehicle Act introduced the position of Traffic Authority. In 2007, when I came to Queens, that position was held by the building official. At the time of his retirement, it was handed off to Queens RCMP. From that point, they carried it through till 2020. As you see there, in 2020, the RCMP advised that they were no longer in a position to hold the position of traffic authority, as they didn't have the proper training and education to carry it out responsibly. At that time, I was appointed as the traffic authority, and when Garrett came aboard, he was the alternate. Introducing some concepts of risk and safety. So risk is something that cannot be eliminated. It exists in all forms of transportation. It is the possibility that something bad can happen. Safety is a temporary condition of being protected from risk. Such a thing as absolute safety does not exist. You cannot eliminate all risk. There are only degrees of more and less safe conditions. Roles as traffic authority. So the traffic authority would hold the responsibility to enact the MVA. An engineer would apply training in their ability, and council would allocate resources.
So a quick review of the traffic authority action process. So this is something that we apply regularly and comes directly from the teachings of the Transportation Association of Canada. So one, a concern is received by the traffic authority from public, staff, council, any of those roadway users. Two, the issue is reviewed by the traffic authority, and either one of two things happens: that concern is dismissed, or it is evaluated further, such as a traffic assessment. If it is evaluated further, the traffic assessment can be conducted in-house by an engineer. The recommendations from that assessment implemented by priority, referring to council as necessary for budgetary consideration. Following that, the traffic authority confirms that the recommendations that have been suggested and implemented are effective, and the concern has been handled. More on the traffic assessment process. So there's three main things that kind of go into a traffic assessment. The first being research. So describing the existing conditions in the area of concern. This can be things like speed, visibility, the demographics of an area, as well as flow and traffic patterns. As well, we can also describe the neighborhood evolution with development and things like that. These are very dynamic situations. Application of the guidelines, so evaluating the existing conditions against the deficiencies or improvements that are in the most recent set of guidelines available to us. And finally, providing recommendations or requirements based on those deficiencies or potential improvements.
Following up on that would be implementation. So once a set of recommendations is estimated, we would look for approval, whether it's in budget or not, and following through with an installation from there. So briefly, a summary, the Traffic Authority is appointed under the Municipal Government Act. The Motor Vehicle Act governs the use of highways. The Traffic Safety Act is not yet fully adopted and implemented. The Traffic Authority receives and reviews concerns. A design engineer would evaluate and provide recommendations, and council would approve funding to implement recommendations. And appreciate that that's confusing, because Garrett and I share definitely two hats in multi ways there, being both the traffic authority as well as the engineer in a lot of these cases. So that was very brief and went through pretty quick. If there's any questions, be glad to take them.
Questions for Director Grant?
Where is your area of authority? Like, what's the area?
Our little area of authority is Liverpool. On Highway 8, that begins right at exit 19. On Highway 3 would be Old Cobb's Barn Road, extending up School Street to where School Street turns to Shore Road by the RCMP station. Kind of coming around town to Meadow Pond, we go as far as the Bog Road right here. And through town, we're in sections of Old Port Mattoon Road, Brunswick Street, Wolf Street, and Town Lake Road in a polygon shape. We can provide you with a map, probably make more sense, but it is very central to Liverpool, yeah.
In Councillor Giddey, you haven't lived here way back when, but it would have been all the streets that belong to the town of Liverpool. Councillor Charlton?
Thank you. Recognizing that this topic has come up because of speed concerns and things with our three-way intersection and so on and so forth. So based off of that presentation, am I correct in assuming that both of those issues that were brought up at council are currently under the evaluation stage, where you will then give recommendations to council if it requires additional funds that aren't currently within your budget?
Yeah, I think I understand you. That's pretty fair to say. So as recently as last week, our consultant had traffic measurement devices in town in place. From there, gathering information, doing that kind of research to study the flow and patterns and speeds and that kind of stuff, which are related as well to those concerns that you raised. Yeah.
And I just wanted to provide a little truer statements. I just want to provide a little clarity in the interest of full disclosure and transparency to council. There is one thing that has caused, I think, a little bit of a I'm not sure exactly how that works, so I'll explain. And I was just looking, I couldn't find it fast enough, but in the MGA there is a section that says that council has the authority to make decisions related to public safety. And so one of the question marks is, how does the Motor Vehicle Act and everything that Adam has just presented, which is all those laws and the standard practice, align with council's ability to then make policy, resolution, bylaw around public safety? So that's where it gets a little bit gray. And so I think what we're trying to do as staff is just making sure that we're making evidence-based decisions. So that's what a lot of that consultant work is about, and so that we can bring back reports that have and information to council that have sort of some evidence for you to then make a decision on. I just want to provide that one clarity that there is, it's not exactly as clear as I would have liked. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Fancy?
That's going to stay on. Okay. With that, well, this is something a totally different way, like us as council bringing back recommendations to staff to say things we'd like to have or like to see change or anything. We're going through on a different scale, which is saying if we do the process, we bring our concerns to the traffic authority, which is you, and it comes up to a process that way. So when we talk of it that way, I guess it's going to be a different, we have to go through the proper channels, which would be coming not to council, but yet in council is where we would like to discuss different matters. Like say, for instance, over in Bristol, would we want to set a street lights further up or anything? Or would we like to have traffic turning right or such as like that? We aren't bringing that as a discussion there. So how do we do the proper process of coming to the traffic authority and be able to ask these questions?
I think to kind of reflect CEO Jodry's comments, it puts us in an awkward position when council forces staff to commit to action that's not warranted. So offering us the opportunity to evaluate, do a proper assessment, and rely on, I guess, field expertise of what works, what doesn't work. And I'm trying to think of a non-contentious issue. It could be something as simple as a flashing light at a crosswalk, and perhaps, it's suggested that could improve crosswalk safety somewhere on George Street, for instance. It could. However, there's a myriad of other factors that we should really consider before we just put up a flashing light ill-willingly, if we don't know everything about flashing lights and what the other impacts of traffic, and consider all of the different aspects as a wholesome approach. So I guess offering us the opportunity to evaluate in a proper manner and bring back the information to support what actions we're willing to enact, I guess. Is that fair?
Understood. Do you want to continue? Okay.
Yeah, so with that though, is there a time where we set in, I guess, again, you're wearing two different hats, so it's hard to make these discussions because we're two different directions. Because there's some things that could be implemented, it's gonna come with a higher cost. Well, maybe there's a better way of doing it than, but if we don't have a discussion, not, because as council, we're trying to direct you, while you're saying, I am the director, so, I'm supposed to be doing this, so it's a fine line between how we do these things, but is there ways of having discussions prior to, or is it we just wait to see what you come back as a recommendation, so to speak? I don't mean this to be, you know what I'm saying, it's weird.
If I was to bring back something that you didn't agree with, I would certainly hope that you would call me out on it and seek clarity, I guess, from that perspective. I guess all I'm suggesting is that recommendations such as turning a throughfare into a four-way stop might not solve the problem. If we're talking about, and not to pick on the enforcement agencies, but enforcement type matters, whether we put more stop signs up and people still don't stop at them doesn't necessarily accomplish the outcome that we're looking for, which is to promote safety. So we need to think about all those things and address them with the proper avenues.
Councillor Charlton.
Thank you. I think I'm understanding what Deputy Mayor Fancy's saying is maybe there's a concern that you shouldn't ask for something specific, but I think from what I'm understanding, if there's an issue, if residents are complaining about an issue in your area, we as council have every right, obviously, to bring up a safety concern, but more so saying, what are the options, not giving direct options, because we aren't aware of all the facts, some of which Director Grant has already mentioned. So I think it's that, because it is our job to listen to our residents and bring these concerns forward. We don't have all the answers. That's why we lean on staff. So I think we have to say, identify the area in question and say, what are the recommendations? Sounds like a good way to me to move forward. And then on the other end of that, I recall McLeod Street, is that the street by the cellar? That came forward to us that was just a recommendation to turn that street into a one-way because it wasn't really wide enough and it didn't make sense. And that wasn't a recommendation from council at all. That was just identified during a water and sewer project, I believe. So I think it goes both sides, I'm understanding.
CEO Dodry and then Director Grant.
If I could, exactly, I would say I think Councillor Charlton has hit on point. Certainly, I don't want council to feel like they're asking staff for, certainly if there are safety matters that come up, absolutely ask for reports, and it is our job to then go and bring that information back. And to the presentation earlier, I think the point is that there could be a myriad of options that would work, obviously with scaling costs, right? And so part of the question is how much money could we put into this, and sort of questions like that may come up. But then I think it's important to note that I'm just going to use an analogy for a minute. It's sort of like maybe if you can imagine the relationship between the police board and the police. So the police board couldn't say, go charge that person with theft. They could say, we're concerned about theft, or we're concerned about this issue, or that. Please tell us what we can do about it or how to mitigate, but they're responsible for enforcing the criminal code, for example, right? Or in this case, the Motor Vehicle Act. And that it's not quite the same thing. I'm just trying to make an analogy of, I certainly don't want council to think that they have to ask staff permission. That is not at all the case. We're just trying to set out some clarity around roles and responsibilities and how that should unfold. I just wanted to provide some clarity. Like, we absolutely execute, like, the traffic authority is your traffic authority. Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Sure. I was just going to offer that the McLeod Street was a suggestion brought forward by a business owner in the area as a hazard. Purely coincidentally, he just sought opportunity while we were there working to accomplish something. And it was great time. It worked to our favor, really. So that's all.
And that's a good point for one of your slides that said you address traffic conditions, be they from council, RCMP, citizens. Any other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Fancy?
Yeah, so my question really is then, is say if we had a situation, say in McLeod Street, stuff like that, and we saw you were bringing forward a direction or solution to the, would it be wrong for us to say, Adam, have you considered this, or have you looked at that and say, yeah, but we considered that, but it's no good, it doesn't work there. That we wouldn't be then in turn trying to tell you what to do. We could be able to ask about it, because rather than just sit there and wonder, I wonder if that would ever work. We could be able to at least bring it at that time and be able to talk about it. Not saying we're directing, but at least being having as a discussion. Maybe not as a discussion. I'll take that back. As just a question.
And here's a case in point. So I had a visitor to my office the other day. The solution for the three-way stop in Liverpool is to put speed bumps on both sides of the crosswalks. So there's another suggestion to put on your little list. But see, I'm not directing you. I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you something that's. However, I do know all the pros and cons of speed bumps, but just so you know, that is probably going to appear somewhere. So there you go.
Before I allow CA Joji, so I did have a suggestion from somebody else to me. Putting in turnstiles like you see at the grocery store or Walmart before pedestrians cross the street could also mitigate how they progress. So there's all kinds of options out there.
I think as staff, we always have to be like whatever ideas, and we have to consider those, and absolutely they should be analyzed as part of our work. And certainly if there's an option we haven't analyzed it reasonably, we should have, then I think it's incumbent upon us to communicate that to us. Yeah, I just wanted to provide some clarity. Yeah.
And I mean, certainly options are always welcome. One of the most useful tools we have is the TAC manuals, and it's a thickness of resource like this. And for every situation that we can brainstorm here, perhaps it's already happened somewhere else, and they have a treatment guide for it. So pretty much every incident that we've come across or instance has a methodology to flow through. Yes, no, that we evaluate as many of the options as you conceive before we act.
Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, thank you, Director Grant. Thank you, Mr. Chetwin. It's always wonderful to see you, and I know the public pressure was there, and but I thank you for explaining the research and the importance of finding solutions that work. Thank you. And that was our last matter for public discussion, so I would ask for a motion to move in camera, moved by Councillor Gidney, seconded by Councillor Brown. All those in favor? And we will move in camera shortly. So we have one added item coming out of in camera, and I'm going to call it 8.0. Global Empire Corporation lease amendment, and there is a recommendation to be made. It's within the package. Councillor Romero.
I move that the Council of Region of Queens Municipality authorize the Mayor and Chief Administrative Officer to execute the amended lease dated February 1st, 2024.
And that's seconded by Councillor Gidney. And for our viewing audience, this is just an amendment to the lease for Global Empire. They've been in our community for several years. They're functioning well. Half of the building is no longer required for them. They're making great use of one half of the building. So we've amended the lease to show the reflection of of the half of the building that they're not using. So, is there any other comments councilors would like to make? If not, question's been called. All those in favor? Contrary? Passed. And the meeting is adjourned.